Hey there, welcome back to the Dreamland Encounters. Here on this channel, I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I'm Travis Morgan, and I've been working at Cotner Auto on Columbus's east side since I was 22. Started with tires and oil. Now I mostly handle diagnostics and electrical work. It's a family-run shop tucked behind a strip mall near Mount Carmel. Just a simple setup with 4 bays and a fenced lot. Last October, near the month's end, I was closing up alone. Dave, the other tech, had left early for a school thing, and Mr. Cotner was already gone. No big deal. I actually enjoy those quiet moments when the compressors stop and it's just me and my tools. It was a Wednesday and I was working on a Ford Edge in Bay 3, replacing a rear wiring harness that had been chewed through, probably by possums or mice. My music was playing softly as I worked. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Just once, super quick. Everything cut out for maybe half a second. Shop lights, music, even my laptop. Then, everything came right back on. I checked the breaker panel, but nothing seemed amiss. We'd had weird outages before, but not like this sudden blink. I went back to work, finishing up the wiring and torquing the bracket. That's when things got strange. All the motion sensors in the lot triggered simultaneously. Every single floodlight outside snapped on at once. These lights are set up in 3 separate zones: front drive, side alley, and the fenced yard, and they don't normally communicate. You could wave in one area without setting off lights in another. But this time, they all lit up at the exact same moment. I shut off my drill and stepped outside. The air was cold enough to see my breath, but completely still. No wind, no passing cars, just an eerie silence across the strip mall. The lot was silent and empty. Darkness enveloped everything. 2 doors down, the Pizza Hut sat black and quiet. Walking past the garage doors, I stood in the middle of the lot, scanning my surroundings. Absolutely nothing moved. No people, no activity. Everything was flooded with bright light, creating that strange, flat color that makes it hard to tell the time of day. As I turned to go back inside, something caught my eye overhead. 3 dim orange lights, spread wide apart, were gliding incredibly slowly from the west, just above the treetops behind the shop. They moved with a strange heaviness, as if connected to something massive yet effortlessly moving. Not like a typical aircraft, these lights formed a perfect triangular shape, one leading and 2 behind, like a flat arrowhead. The most bizarre part was the complete absence of anything connecting them. No outline, no visible structure, just 3 points moving in perfect synchronization as if linked by an invisible force. Silent and steady, it crawled directly over the shop. I stood frozen, probably with my mouth open, watching. Its speed was maybe 15 or 20 miles per hour, slower than any plane I'd ever seen. No wings, no body, nothing reflective, just 3 constant orange glowing points. A strange sensation pressed against my chest as it passed. Not exactly fear, but more like underwater pressure. Breathing became difficult for a few seconds, and my eyes watered slightly. Then it continued east, disappearing over the strip mall. I remained motionless until it vanished. Snapping out of my trance, I ran into the office and pulled up the security footage. Camera by camera, I checked everywhere. Front lot, back fence, alley, inside bays. Nothing but static lights and empty pavement. Even when I reviewed the exact moment it passed overhead, the cameras showed absolutely nothing. No video evidence, no dark shapes, the sensor logs, just emptiness, leaving me with more motion sensors told a different story. Every single one farming near Delaware, Ohio for most of my life. 10:38 p.m. The farm's been in our logs well. 3 generations. Raccoons often set off just a couple hundred acres of corn and soybeans. But this was different. Typical Midwest landscape. It's usually quiet, especially after sunset. Last December, right after the first big snow, I was doing my usual morning rounds, checking fences, making sure equipment was in order. That's when I spotted something strange in one of the cornfields I hadn't harvested yet. About 50 feet of one row had its stalks bent at a perfect 90-degree angle, right in the middle. Not broken or snapped, just precisely folded. This wasn't normal snow or wind damage, and it definitely didn't look like animal tracks. When something typically tramples a cornfield, you see broken stalks or crushed plants. But this looked intentional. I ran my hand along the stalks. They were stiff but completely intact, like cardboard sharply creased but not torn. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing else disturbed. Just that one perfectly straight line of folded stalks. I tried to rationalize it, maybe uneven snow weight, but something felt off. Later that night, a triangle passed over the lot. No movement, just silent passage. I shut everything down and drove home, barely sleeping. I didn't tell anyone, it felt too strange to explain. A few nights later, I came in to check a missed parts delivery. The radio in Bay 2 was on, low volume, tuned to static. I hadn't used that radio in weeks. Everything else was untouched, doors locked, but that radio had definitely been off before. Since then, I've kept a big crank flashlight in my truck. No batteries. I don't trust power like I used to. Weeks later, I'm still thinking about what I saw that night. The morning was calm, with a light dusting of snow across the field. Everything seemed normal, except for a strange bend in the corn rows. I took some photos on my phone, but they didn't quite capture the peculiarity of the scene. That night, an eerie silence descended. The kind of quiet that makes you hold your breath. No wind, no usual nighttime sounds. Around 11:30 p.m., a noise on the roof jolted me awake. Something was pacing up there, deliberate, heavy steps, not the scurrying of an animal, but something large moving with careful precision. 4 or 5 steps, then a pause, then the same measured rhythm again. I lay completely still, listening. After several rounds, the noise stopped. When morning came, I went outside to investigate. The roof looked untouched. The fresh snow lay smooth as glass with no footprints or marks on the shingles. I checked around the house, the barn, the shed. No tracks anywhere. The snow was pristine, as if nothing had disturbed it all night. A sense of unease crept over me. The noise had been real, yet left no trace. Returning to the field, I took a closer look at the bent corn. Something caught my eye. The folded stalks weren't random. They formed a subtle, repeating spiral shape, almost like a loose coil running the length of the row. It seemed deliberate, as if the corn was trying to point or communicate something. Running my fingers over the stalks, I could still feel a lingering coldness. The rest of the day passed normally. No neighbors stopped by, no sheriff came asking questions, no calls, no reports. That night I stayed inside with the porch light on, half expecting the pacing to return, but there was only silence. Days passed and the mystery remained unexplained. The cornfield had been a mystery for weeks. Every morning I'd check, but the stalk remained folded in a precise spiral pattern. It looked almost maintained, though I never saw anyone tending to it. The idea of setting up cameras crossed my mind, but I'm not one for modern gadgets. Basid, as something about the situation felt like it was watching me just as intently as I was watching it. One afternoon, a movement near the tree line caught my eye. I initially thought it might be a deer or a stray dog, but whatever it was vanished into the woods without a sound. No rustling, no breaking branches, just gone. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. Then last week, something strange happened. I was working in the barn when the power suddenly cut out across the entire area. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside. The night sky was crystal clear, stars sharp and bright. In the distance, beyond the trees, a faint glow emerged. This wasn't like typical town lights. It was a steady, soft blue, reminiscent of police emergency lights. The glow lingered for about 5 minutes before disappearing completely, and the power restored just as abruptly. It felt like a message, though its meaning remained unclear. Now the corn's been harvested and the field looks entirely normal. No bent stalks, no patterns, nothing. The snow has melted, leaving soft, muddy ground. But even now, when I'm alone, I sometimes hear a quiet pacing on the roof or catch a glimpse of that strange blue light through the trees. Each time, the hair on my arm stands up. I'm Dave Carter, a truck driver from Toledo with over 15 years on the road. That spring evening, I was hauling a load from Cleveland to Indianapolis, driving through northwest Ohio after dark. I pulled into a small, quiet rest area near Lima to take a break and have something to eat from my cooler. I can't explain what happened in that field. I don't know if it was someone watching, something manipulating the landscape, or just my mind trying to make sense of these unexplained events. But one thing I'm certain of, that perfect, sharp spiral pattern wasn't a coincidence. and whatever moved across my roof that night left absolutely no trace behind. The rest area was quiet, almost eerily so. No crickets chirping, no distant traffic sounds, not even the usual highway hum, just silence. I'd pulled into the lot with its scattered trucks, dim streetlights, and typical roadside setup. After shutting off the engine and stretching, I noticed something strange with my phone. My battery was dropping unusually fast. I'd parked at 80%, but within minutes it had plummeted to 60%. The cold didn't seem like a good explanation, since it wasn't even that chilly. When I checked again later, it was down to 50%. Something felt off. Pulling my jacket tighter, I looked up and saw it. A soft, dim orange glow hovering above the distant tree line. This wasn't like city lights or a sunset. It was more like a lantern suspended in invisible fog, completely motionless and hanging low in the sky. Not bright enough to cast shadows, but definitely present. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if fatigue was playing tricks on me. I wasn't drinking, just tired from a long day of driving. Curiosity drew me to move around, and I noticed something bizarre. My phone's battery drained faster when I moved away from the truck. Stepping back inside, the drain stopped completely. When I tried to start the truck, nothing happened. Just a dead clicking sound, though the cab lights worked fine. I wasn't panicked. I had jumper cables and could call for help if needed. So I paced around, scanning the area with my flashlight. A few trucks in the distance had running engines, but no one was outside. That orange glow remained, seeming to wait for something. After about 10 minutes, I tried the engine again. This time, it started immediately. As I prepared to leave, the glow vanished, completely, as if it had never existed. My phone's battery was back to 78% and stable. I shook my head, bewildered by the entire experience. I work maintenance for a small wind farm in southern Idaho. Not a glamorous job, just two turbines spread across a few hundred acres past the Snake River. Most days, I'm walking dirt access roads alone, checking panels, grease points, and cables. Back in October, I switched to the evening shift to cover for a coworker whose wife was having a baby. My hours ran from 2 p.m. to around 10 p.m., which wasn't bad. That week had been unusually calm. No storms, no wildlife disrupting the equipment. I was mainly logging numbers and running diagnostics. Like always, I carried a standard Motorola handheld radio to check in with dispatch every couple of hours. We use a set of fixed channels programmed into the unit. On Wednesday, while doing a loop around Turbine 9, I started picking up strange static. Not full white noise, but little pulses and blips, like catching a distant transmission. The sound was low and faint. I figured maybe highway patrol or a nearby farm was bleeding into our channels, which happens occasionally. I checked the signal strength. 2 bars. Weird, but not impossible. I spoke into the mic, a simple Unit 3 checking channel, but got no response. Just that same intermittent pulse. Switching channels didn't help. The static continued, coming and going in bursts, sometimes 2 in a row. As I pulled back onto the highway later, my radio started crackling with static and faint voices, like someone was trying to communicate from far away. It lasted only seconds before fading out. I adjusted the dial, but nothing else came through. The rest of the trip was uneventful. I kept watching the sky for that orange glow, but it never reappeared. At home, I fully charged my phone and checked its battery health. No issues. The truck started fine the next day too. I can't explain what happened, but I vividly remember that glow, how my phone drained, and how the truck wouldn't start until the strange phenomenon disappeared. All I wanted was to get home safe. I was on my usual night shift at the wind farm, walking the grounds. A strange sound caught my attention, a rhythmic breathing through the radio. It lasted about 10 minutes, then stopped. I didn't report it, thinking it was just some random radio interference from a trucker or farm crew. The next night, the same thing happened near Turbine 2. Different location but identical signal. What struck me as odd was how the sound only appeared when I wasn't speaking. The moment I'd key the mic and talk, it would go silent. As soon as I stopped, the static returned. This time, the sound persisted longer. I walked around trying to understand its origin. Strangely, it followed me, moving with my steps. The audio was too low to distinguish clearly, but I started recording it on the radio's voice memo function, mostly to prove to my supervisor that I wasn't imagining things. Back home, I transferred the recording to my laptop and listened through headphones. The first minute was just typical sounds. My footsteps, breathing, gravel crunching. Then the static began. Initially, I thought it was the same pulsing pattern, but when I increased the volume, I realized something was different. It wasn't just static. Beneath the noise was something else. Not exactly a voice, but breathing. Not my breathing. This was slower, deeper. One long, drawn-out breath every 6 or 7 seconds. Inhale, hold, exhale. The static seemed to be constructed from the breath itself, not just surrounding it. Halfway through, I stopped the recording and sat in silence, listening to my house. Nothing seemed wrong, but something felt off. The next day, I brought the radio to the shop and asked my coworkers about interference. Derek, who also worked night shifts, hadn't noticed anything unusual. He joked about ham radio signals or military transmissions. I didn't mention the breathing. That night, I switched to channel 6, a frequency we rarely use. Around 9:15, near turbine 12, the stat IC returned. This time, it was different, one continuous, unbroken hiss. The night started like any other during my 15 years of long-haul trucking. This was late March 2018, somewhere in Nebraska. I was hauling fertilizer from South City down toward Colorado Springs, mostly following Route 83. The landscape was typical of those routes. Empty land, occasional gas stations with terrible coffee, and that stretch between North Platte and McCook that feels impossibly remote. At first, the radio seemed normal. Then something changed. A hiss shifted pitch, almost like a Doppler effect, but without any movement. I looked around. No wind, no animals, nothing. I tapped the mic. Unon 3, open comms. Anyone out there? Silence followed. After releasing the mic button, I heard another breath. This time it was louder, coming directly through the speaker. Not a recording, but live. The sound wasn't mechanical, yet not quite human. It felt massive, like a lung the size of a furnace. I backed away from the turbine, scanning the road and field's edge. Visibility ended after just 10 feet. Nothing but empty scrub. No fences, no real trees, just sage, dirt, and distant hills. I switched the radio off, then back on. Complete silence. My last evening shift that week was supposed to be routine. I was covering for another guy, helping close out the week. Near the battery bank on the south end, the radio suddenly came to life by itself. It jumped from channel 1 to 3, then 5, each time producing only static. Finally, it settled on channel 2, our main channel. Then I heard something strange, my own voice from the previous day. The recording played exactly as it happened before. Unit 3, open comms. Anyone out there? Followed by that same pause and breath. I shut everything off and drove back to the shop, skipping the usual checklist. The next week, I grabbed a new radio unit without explanation. The old one likely remains in the drawer. Since then, nothing unusual has occurred. No static, no mysterious voices. I still have the recording on my laptop, but I haven't played it again. Night driving through open country can be eerily quiet. Long stretches of highway with nothing but fields and barbed wire, no towns or truck stops for miles. When something goes wrong out here, you're on your own. I've driven this route countless times, but one night something strange happened. Just past 9 p.m., around mile marker 211, I noticed an odd sound on the CB radio. Not talking to anyone, just had it on low like always. A mechanical clicking noise, fast, precise, like a typewriter. Not static, not Morse code. Just steady, rhythmic clicks cycling evenly. Adjusting the squelch didn't help. The sound persisted across all channels, almost embedded in the signal itself. I scanned the landscape, nothing but open fields under a clear sky. Then I saw it, a star that wasn't quite behaving like the others. At first I thought it was a windshield smudge. Tapping and wiping changed nothing. Every time the clicking hit a specific rhythm, 3 quick beats, then 1 slow, the star would shift slightly left, maybe an inch from an outstretched hand's perspective. I killed the CB. The clicking stopped, but the star kept moving. Driving at 65, I watched it remain sharp and white, twitching periodically. Past marker 213, it stopped moving. The sky returned to normal. The next night, curiosity drew me back. Northbound this time, around 9:20 p.m., the pattern repeated exactly. Approaching marker 213, the clicking started. That same bright star sat motionless until the rhythm triggered its slight leftward movement. I tried calling out on the CB, hoping someone else was nearby. Silence. No response, not even the usual squelch feedback. Once I crossed marker 211, everything went quiet again. The first time I noticed something odd was when a star held steady eye and the sky. I started timing its behavior. Over the next few nights, I made sure to pass through a specific stretch of road around the same time. One particularly windy night, moonlight revealed the grain fields rippling beneath me. Between mile markers 211 and 213, everything went eerily quiet. The wind seemed to vanish completely. No sound from the rig, no road vibration, just silence and those strange clicks. That night, I noticed something else peculiar. When the star shifted, my interior dome light flickered briefly, just a single subtle pulse like a momentary voltage drop. My gauges remained steady, and the engine ran smoothly, but the light definitely dimmed for an instant. I kept both hands on the wheel, avoiding the CB. The clicking continued softly, feeling almost like a scheduled check-in. Over the next month, I drove through that stretch 4 more times. Each time, the same pattern repeated precisely. Only between markers 211 and 213, only between 9:10 and 9:40 p.m. Once I pulled over at mile marker 212 and idled with the CB on. The clicking grew more intense, not louder, but more present, as if creeping closer to my consciousness. The star moved again, pulsing slightly brighter for half a second. My dome light flickered in sync. Then came that distinct smell of hot copper and ozone, a scent I'd only encountered once before, after an inverter fried in an old cab. I immediately threw the truck in gear and kept moving. I avoided that route afterward, telling dispatch I preferred going west through Ogallala. It cost me extra hours, but I didn't care. My last drive through that section was in January 2020, just before quitting the road. Snow lined the shoulders, and a full moon illuminated a clear sky. I'd almost forgotten about the previous encounters when suddenly, around 9:15, the CV popped once. No clicking, just a single pop, then complete silence. When I looked up, the star had already shifted, seeming to have been watching ahead of schedule. It all started on a Thursday evening in late July. I was walking Casey, my black lab mix, around the block before darkness fell. We live in a small town outside Missoula, not rural, but quiet. Just a regular neighborhood. The neighborhood was typical Montana. Chain link fences, gravel driveways, porch lights ticking on and off. The day had been scorching, one of those dry heat waves where asphalt gets tacky under your shoes and pine sap bakes on tree bark. Even at 8:30, the air felt like standing next to an open oven. Casey seemed unbothered, trotting ahead on her usual route, sniffing weeds and fence posts with her usual curiosity. Halfway down Morgan Street, something strange happened. My breath appeared as white fog, just like a winter morning. I stopped and took another breath. Same result. A clear puff hung in the air. Looking down, Casey appeared completely normal, still investigating a mailbox post as if searching for hidden treasure. I slowly turned in a circle. No wind, no unusual sounds. The sun lingered low behind the trees, just touching the horizon. Then I felt it. The cold struck my chest suddenly, like walking into an industrial freezer. No gradual cooling, just an instant temperature drop. Goosebumps erupted across my arms. I tugged Casey's leash, urging her forward. She hesitated, sniffed the air, then resumed walking. In those next few steps, the temperature plummeted. My ears stung. My nose ran. To my right, frost was forming on a small metal fence post. A crusty silver layer spread rapidly, like time-lapse photography. I stared, blinking, trying to comprehend. I started to reach out, but stopped an inch away. The cold was intense, not just cool evening air, but dead of winter freezing. Casey growled, soft but steady. She stood stiff, ears pulled back, tail lowered. Suddenly, she barked sharply and spun around on the sidewalk. She lunged, so hard I stumbled, the leash wrapped tight around my wrist. I gripped it firmly. And then, just as quickly, the cold vanished, like someone flipped a switch. One moment, my breath was foggy and my teeth were chattering. The next, it was back to the sticky, dry heat of the day. No more fog, no frost, and Casey's leash, gone. I swear it. I ran after Casey, my heart hammering, arms feeling like they'd been plunged into ice water. She bolted down the street, tail tucked and moving in that panicked, half-hunched way dogs do when they're terrified. I had lost the leash. It was simply gone from my wrist. though my fingers were still clenched as if holding something. 3 blocks later, she was scratching frantically at our front door. My hands shook as I unlocked it, and she immediately darted inside, hiding under the table. Standing on the porch, I caught my breath. Everything looked normal. Crickets chirping, porch lights glowing, sprinklers casting misty light. But something felt off. The street was too still, too clean, almost like a perfectly staged scene. Inside, I poured water and sat down. Casey stayed hidden for 10 minutes. When she finally emerged, she stuck close and refused to go near the door. I checked my wrist for marks. Nothing. No rope burn, no redness. It was as if the leash had never existed. That night, I retraced our walking route. The fence post looked unchanged, the metal warm from the day's heat. Grass was dry and scratchy. The strange feeling had dissipated, but I couldn't complete the full loop, turning back early. The next morning, I discovered the short leash was missing. I searched everywhere, laundry room, couch cushions, car trunk, finding nothing. Even a daylight street walk revealed no trace. I knew I hadn't dropped it. I'd felt it on my wrist when it vanished. We skipped walks for a couple days. When I bought a replacement, same brand, same length, it felt strange in my hand. Casey seemed mostly fine since then, still occasionally barking at dark windows, a habit she'd always had. I've never experienced that bone-chilling coldness again, not so suddenly or deeply. I'd been into amateur astronomy since college, spending most nights tracking satellites or catching meteorites. That night in Maple Ridge, a small town in central Ohio, I'd set up my Celestron Nexstar behind the old high school baseball field around 9:15. It was the only spot near town with minimal light pollution, and the janitor didn't mind me parking there as long as I cleaned up. The night was crisp and clear, with temperatures in the mid-40s and just a faint western breeze. About 40 minutes into my observation, I spotted an unusual formation of lights approaching from the northeast, hovering around 30 degrees above the horizon. At first I assumed it was a military night exercise. We weren't far from Wright-Patterson after all. 6 lights moved in a V formation, similar to a flock of geese. 5 of them blinked like typical aircraft, but the 6th light at the back right remained constant, white and steady. Something felt different. I could hear a low, distant hum of engines, but strangely, the unblinking light produced no sound at all. Curious, I checked my phone's flight radar app. Nothing showed up in that direction, not even the blinking lights. Odd, but not entirely unheard of with military aircraft. Using my telescope, I zoomed in. The 5 blinking lights revealed faint outlines, wings, tail fins, heat shimmer. Definitely jets, probably F-16s. But the 6th light, just a perfect, solid sphere. No structure, no discernible shape. Later, that moment would replay in my mind. What if I'd crossed the street differently? What if Casey hadn't been on a leash? The cold sensation that swept through me came and went quickly. But something about that space felt altered. Now we crossed that block without thinking. The leashman ever reappeared. The air still moves differently there. The light was white, about the same size as the others, but something felt different. It didn't distort, flicker, or reflect light. As I watched, I noticed it wasn't keeping perfect formation with the group. While the other 5 jets flew in a tight V, this one drifted slightly, veering about 5 degrees to the right before correcting itself. No blinking, no sound, no tracker signal. They passed overhead at around 20,000 feet, the jets rumbling low across the sky before fading west. But this unblinking light didn't follow. Instead, it stopped right over the field as the others continued their path, vanishing behind the tree line without a backward glance. I locked my telescope on the light. It was a pure white sphere, solid and unmoving. No outline, no shadow. Unlike stars that shimmer in the atmosphere, this remained perfectly still. For a full minute, I watched in silence. Then, without warning, it moved straight up. Not an arc, not gradual acceleration, just an immediate vertical climb, like a cursor being dragged upward on a screen, smooth, precise. It rose to about twice its original height and stopped again. A slight tremor ran through me. Not panic, but that unsettling feeling when something defies explanation. I've tracked satellites, watched the ISS countless times. This was different. I stepped back from the telescope, observing with naked eyes. The light was dimmer now, higher up, but still that steady white. Then it blinked. 1 full second of brightness, then gone. I waited. Nothing. The wind picked up, rustling dry leaves across the field. I realized I'd been holding my breath. Another blink, another second-long flash, slightly higher than before. I sensed it was still climbing. The transition was jarring, from dark sky to bright light in an instant. No flare, no fade, like switching between frames. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I packed up quickly, my mind racing with what I'd just witnessed. I moved into my apartment in a quiet part of Salem, Massachusetts, late September last year. The building was an old brick place on a side street, nothing fancy, but with decent rent and close to downtown. I was mostly happy with it, near work and some parks, with neighbors who kept to themselves. The first few weeks went by normally. I was settling in, unpacking, establishing routines. 2 big windows faced the street, one in the living room, one in the bedroom. A street lamp outside cast a yellowish glow at night. I noticed how dark the room's corners stayed, even with lights on. Not unusual for older buildings, but something I remembered. The first glimpse happened while I was lying on the couch, scrolling on my phone. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a shadow beyond the living room window. Not a person or tree, but a dark, shapeless form like a smudge or silhouette. When I looked directly, it vanished. Over the next week, these glimpses continued, always at room corners or just outside windows. The shape had no clear edges, just a dark form hovering as if watching from a distance. I rationalized it away, tired from work, stressed from late hours. I tried ignoring it, but the feeling grew heavier. One night, about a week after moving in, I was making dinner in the kitchen when I saw the shape again, this time between the living room and hallway. After that night, things changed. I go out less now. Where I used to set up my equipment 3 or 4 times a week, now it's maybe once or twice a month. I haven't told anyone in town. It's the kind of place where people discuss lawnmowers. I'm already known as the space guy. Don't need to be the crazy one too. I checked the satellite logs after that night. Nothing passed overhead in that window. No weather balloons, no military flight notices. I didn't even bother with lens caps afterward. Scent tossed everything into the Jeep and left. And now I don't look at flight formations the same way anymore. I stood still, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. It had faded away like smoke, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of light or shadow from the street lamp. But the way it vanished wasn't normal. No flicker, no gradual fade, just gone in an instant. Occasional whispers and soft rustling sounds would drift through the apartment when everything else was completely silent. Whenever I tried to focus on these sounds, they would immediately stop. I mentioned it to Clara during one of her visits, but her joking comment about ghosts didn't help. We quickly changed the subject. The encounters became more frequent. Sometimes twice a day, the shape would appear just at the edge of my vision, never fully visible, never close enough to confront. I tried everything, changing lighting, closing curtains, turning on lamps. Nothing made a difference. Strange things started happening with my phone too. Apps would freeze near the windows, the screen would flicker, or the camera would fail to open. One night, I attempted to photograph the shape outside, but the camera only showed static. I deleted the picture, assuming it was just a technical glitch. The most unsettling moment came one evening while getting ready for bed. As I passed the bedroom window, I saw it standing in the shadows under the tree. Darker than the night itself, like a silhouette that absorbed light, it remained completely still. When I blinked, it disappeared. I researched the building's history online, hoping to find some explanation. But there was nothing unusual, no strange reports, no odd stories from previous tenants. The neighbors were friendly but kept to themselves, and no one ever mentioned anything out of the ordinary. That weekend, I spent the entire day at home, trying to distract myself. As evening fell, I sat in the living room with only a small lamp providing light. The presence returned, but this time felt different. Instead of fading quickly, the shape seemed to linger. It was like it was waiting, holding steady just at the edge of my vision. When I looked directly, it didn't immediately vanish. I sat motionless, staring, my heart racing. The air felt heavy and cold, like a weight pressing down on me. My arms prickled with goosebumps. After what seemed like a minute, the shape dissolved, drifting away like smoke in a gentle breeze. I started keeping a journal to track these encounters. They always happened in the late afternoon or evening, never in the morning. No clear pattern emerged, but the constant feeling of being watched never left me. I tried talking to people, hoping someone could explain what I was experiencing. Their suggestions of sleep paralysis or strange lighting never quite fit. One night, the shape appeared outside my bedroom window, this time at the edge of the yard. I cracked the window open, listening. Only wind rustling through trees broke the silence. The next morning, I found broken branches scattered beneath the window. No footprints, no other signs of disturbance. Exhaustion began consuming me. My doctor said I was fine, but I felt drained. I tried everything: new curtains, bright daylight bulbs, rearranging furniture. Nothing stopped the shape from appearing. Then one evening, everything changed. I came home and searched every corner, every window. The shape was gone. For the first time in weeks, relief washed over me. That night, I slept with windows open and lights off. The air felt fresh and clean. At 3 a.m., a soft tapping woke me. My heart raced as I sat up but saw nothing, just an empty street and quiet trees. Since then, the shape appears less frequently. Sometimes I catch a fleeting glimpse in my peripheral vision, but it doesn't stay. The feeling of being watched has diminished. I still don't understand what it was or why it was there. It never attempted to harm me or communicate. It simply watched and faded away. Fairbanks has its quirks, and power outages are just one of them. I'm Matt Olson, a local through and through, used to the cold, long nights and unexpected moments that come with living here. That particular evening started around 7:00 p.m. while I was wrapping up a frozen pizza in my living room. Suddenly, the lights flickered once and vanished. No warning, no buzzing transformers, just complete darkness. I figured it was another typical power issue, maybe a storm or the local power company acting up. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside to investigate. The street was pitch black, illuminated only by moonlight peeking through thin clouds. No streetlights, no headlights. Just the usual stillness that descends when the city goes quiet. Then something caught my eye. A bright, perfectly spherical light, hovering about 30 feet above the road in front of my house. This wasn't a typical light. It was a steady white-blue glow that seemed to breathe life into the darkness below. Initially, I thought it might be a drone or a neighbor's spotlight, but everything remained dark and silent. No drone hum, no engines, not even the familiar buzz of electricity, just this motionless, silent light. I pulled on my jacket and stepped onto the porch, flashlight and phone in hand. Attempting to call someone, I realized there was no signal. The porch light wouldn't turn on, and nearby electronics were completely dead. An eerie quietness settled around me, different from a simple blackout. Curiosity drove me to shine my flashlight at the orb, giving a quick flick. The light didn't respond traditionally, but shifted slightly to the left, almost as if acknowledging my presence. I backed onto the lawn, transfixed by its glow. My digital watch stopped ticking, adding to the strange atmosphere. After what felt like 5 minutes, though time seemed distorted, the orb began to fade slowly, leaving me with more questions than answers about what I'd just witnessed. I'm Gabe Carlson, a field tech with the Arctic Wildlife Study Team. Every spring, we set up camp on a stretch of tundra near the Brooks Range past Prue Bay. It's a remote location, miles from civilization, mostly a frozen wasteland with low shrubs and snow even in early May. This was my first time working the tundra in late spring when the ice starts to thin, but the nights remain long and cold. We were there for a week, tracking caribou and testing remote sensors. That night, I was on watch, sitting just outside our tent cluster, sipping coffee from my thermos. The others were winding down inside. The sky was clear, stars bright but distant, and the air dead still. Not even a breeze stirred. I was looking out over the snow when I noticed something low and bright, hovering maybe 50 feet from camp. It wasn't moving like a plane or helicopter. Instead, it was this steady, almost unnatural white glow, brighter than any flashlight or headlamp, but without that harsh beam. It kind of lit up the snow around it like a big lantern, with this weird evenness. The light dimmed until it was just a faint shimmer, and then nothing. The power didn't come back right away. It was still out for a solid half hour after the light disappeared. When the lights finally flickered back on, everything snapped back to life. The clock on the microwave, my phone signal, even the car key fob beeped like nothing had happened. I was standing there on the porch feeling like I'd just seen something impossible, but completely silent. I never saw anything like that before or since. No fireflies, no drones, no planes, just that sphere glowing, quiet, and then gone. I told a few people in town the next day, but most just smiled and said, probably just a weather balloon or some military testing maybe. But if it was, why did all my electronics die? And why didn't it make a sound? I keep thinking about how still it was, how the air seemed to hold itself tight around that thing. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't normal either. It was like the whole world paused just long enough for me to see something I'm still not sure I saw. I'm back to the usual routine now, but sometimes when the power flickers or the night gets extra quiet, I find myself looking up, wondering if that light's still out there, just watching. I stepped closer, my boots crunching softly, but the light stayed perfectly still, no flicker or shadow. At first, I thought it might be a satellite tracker, but those don't give off light. Not a campfire either. We were completely alone out here. The weirdest part was how silent it was. No hum, no buzz, nothing. When I called out to the others, I realized the camp was dark and quiet. Everyone should have been inside by now, but something felt off. I checked my watch, 1:13 a.m. Then suddenly the light vanished, like someone had flipped a switch. One moment it was there, the next, nothing. I tried calling again, but no one answered. As I walked back toward the tents, my head grew fuzzy. The air felt thick, my thoughts sluggish. I stumbled a bit, trying to clear my head. Inside the tent, the team looked shocked. They said I'd been gone almost 2 hours, which made no sense to me. I was certain only 10 minutes had passed. My watch was dead, frozen at 1:13. Looking around, I saw the others' watches had stopped at exactly the same moment. When we went outside, the spot where the light had been looked strange. A perfect 10-foot circle of crushed snow, as if something had pressed down firmly. No footprints, no signs of disturbance, just an unnaturally flat ring in the untouched landscape. We all felt weird afterward. Jessie, one of our biologists, said she felt like she'd been dreaming but couldn't remember anything. Nobody could explain the synchronized watch stoppage. We watched the spot for the next day, but nothing happened. The strange circle remained as the snow slowly settled around it. We packed up and headed back to Purdue Bay, the incident lingering in our minds. Even now, I can't explain what occurred. The tundra's long, silent nights feel different to me now. Sometimes in Anchorage, I catch myself staring at my watch, wondering about that moment of unexplained stillness. I've been a fire lookout since childhood, following my family's tradition. My name's Jake Merrick, and that summer I was stationed near Denali in one of those old wooden towers perched on a ridge with an expansive view of wilderness. The job is straightforward: watch for fires, report any danger, and pass time reading or napping. But late July that year was different. Something unusual began on the second night, just after midnight. I was scanning the dark horizon with binoculars when strange lights caught my attention. They weren't like any aircraft I'd seen. No blinking red or green markers, just steady, pale glows with a faint blue tint. These lights moved smoothly, almost floating across the sky in an inexplicable pattern, clustering and spacing out like they were patrolling a route. The lights seemed deliberate. I tried to radio the ranger station, but only crackling static answered. My usually reliable radio refused communication, and even my backup handheld produced nothing but a low, humming buzz. Each night, the pattern repeated. I attempted to photograph the lights, but my phone captured only fuzzy, indistinct blobs. The forest remained silent except for the persistent electronic hiss. Initially, I assumed some weird atmospheric interference or equipment malfunction. Days passed, and the mysterious lights continued their nay dance across the night sky. Something was happening, but I couldn't explain what. Maybe there are moments missing that I'll never get back. The tower seemed isolated every night, disconnected from the world between midnight and dawn. Something felt off from the start. The dogs from nearby cabins had an unusual reaction I couldn't ignore. Their barking was different, low and growly, not the typical alert bark. It was like they sensed something unnatural lurking just beyond perception. I started tracking everything meticulously, logging the interference times, noting the light's precise movements. They always drifted low over the tree line, moving west to east before vanishing with the sunrise. Midweek, everything changed during a routine walk from the tower to the helipad. A shape caught my eye behind the trees. Tall, slender, absolutely still, but watching. The air around it shimmered like a heat mirage. When I called out, nothing responded. My flashlight revealed only empty space when I swept the beam across where the figure had been. Gone. Just quiet forest surrounding me. I tried convincing myself it was a trick of light or a deer in the shadows, but something felt wrong. An unsettling sensation of being watched followed me back. That night, the radio interference returned precisely after midnight. No matter what frequency I tried, I couldn't reach anyone. The lights appeared again, drifting in their slow, predictable pattern. As I watched, I realized the forest had gone completely silent. No wind, no insects, just an eerie, deep stillness that seemed to suspend time itself. My watch showed nearly an hour passing in what felt like mere minutes. When the lights finally faded into the gray sky, I felt disoriented. The next day, I called the ranger station using a landline from a nearby cabin. They had no reports of strange lights or radio issues. They seemed to think I was experiencing nothing more than bad weather or poor reception. My frustration grew. I knew what I'd experienced during those isolated nights, cut off from any potential help. Night after night, I found myself drawn to the strange lights, feeling an eerie silence pressing in around me. It seemed like these unexplained phenomena were happening just for me, as if I was the only one witnessing them. On the final night of my vigil, I decided to stay awake until dawn, hoping to unravel the mystery. As the hours crept by, the lights returned. The radio hummed with static, and distant dogs barked a soft, steady rhythm. My eyes locked onto one of the orbs as it slowed, hovering almost directly above the tower. It pulsed faintly, almost like it was breathing. My hands trembled in the cold air as I watched intently. The light began to dim and dissolve. Just before vanishing completely, a soft, almost musical hum vibrated through the air. Not loud, but enough to make my skin crawl. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, clear and crisp for a split second. I heard a voice calling my name. Instinctively, I reached for the mic, but the connection cut out as quickly as it had appeared. Silence rushed back in. Morning arrived with the forest's usual sounds, birds calling, wind rustling through the trees. The world seemed to reset, as if the night's strange occurrences had been nothing more than a bad dream. I packed up and left the tower the next day. Back in town, everything felt louder, busier, and less mysterious. Yet the memories lingered. Those nights of drifting lights, unnatural silence, and fleeting shapes in the trees continued to haunt me. I couldn't explain what I'd seen, and no one else seemed to have witnessed it. Perhaps that was the most unsettling part of all. Whatever it was, the experience left me with a profound sense that some parts of the wild are meant to be observed quietly from a distance, never fully understood. It all started on an ordinary evening at Black Rock Cafe. The sun was setting behind the ridge, painting the sky over the old quarry a bruised purple, the same color people claimed to see weird lights. I'd heard the stories all night long, flash tales and rumors of glowing orbs bouncing off limestone walls. None of it meant much to me until a customer named John leaned in and shared his own encounter. "You ever see anything up at Miller's Pit?" he asked. He described orange spheres hovering silently over the blasted rock face, at least 15 feet wide, that blinked out as suddenly as they appeared. As he spoke, I nodded and continued steaming milk for his espresso, only half listening. The cafe was quiet, just me, a zoned-out regular nursing a latte, and John sipping something at a table near the window. When the door chimed, a man in a crisp black suit walked in, no tie, shoes gleaming under the neon sign. He scanned the room methodically, not making eye contact with anyone. Ignoring the counter and menu, he went directly to John's table and sat down opposite him. The fluorescent light seemed to dim slightly as he settled in. John froze mid-drink, his expression tightening. The stranger didn't offer a greeting or show any identification. Instead, he placed his hands flat on the table and asked in a mechanical tone, "Tell me about the lights." John hesitated, then stammered about orange lights hovering in the area. He described back roads, gravel cutoffs, and abandoned cabins. The man listened without taking notes, just nodding once after John finished speaking. I watched from behind the counter, my heart racing, half expecting the stranger to vanish into thin air. When John finished his drink, he pushed back his chair. "I've got to go," he said. The man in black simply responded, "Be safe," his voice unnervingly flat. John glanced at me, giving a small, cryptic wave before hurrying out. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from John. When I looked up, the booth was empty. The suited man had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a faint scent of cinnamon and espresso. I drove home on Route 47, windows down despite the chill. The quarry lay silent and dark to my right, with only a distant street lamp's glow breaking the darkness. I fought the urge to turn onto the gravel access road, knowing better than to chase ghost stories in the night. At home, I set my keys on the hallway table and turned on every light, checking my phone for messages. John's text was the only one there, and I wondered if he'd gone back to be watched again. My laptop booted up, but the fan's mechanical click seemed too loud in the quiet. I almost texted John to ask if he was okay, but stopped, unsure what to say. At the kitchen table, I sipped tea and watched steam curl upward. Soft headlights passed outside, and for a moment I thought I saw a dark shape at the window. Just the neighbor's cat, I realized, my heart easing slightly. I pulled up the local news site. Municipal meetings, a high school band story, a missing cat, nothing unusual. No mentions of lights, suits, or secret coffee shop meetings. Sleep was elusive. I checked the alarm clock repeatedly. 10:03 a.m., then 1:19. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps on gravel. I lay awake until 3:30, half expecting a knock at the door. Morning light felt weak and pale. I brewed coffee, staring at the empty street. The thought of calling John crossed my mind. Maybe he'd seen the man again, or experienced flickering lights. But I didn't call. Instead, I poured the coffee, adding too much cream to make it sweet. At 7:15, I left for my shift, taking the same route past the quarry. Headlights cut through the mist like knives, pine trees looming on both sides. No glow, no sign of anyone near the cut line. In the cafe parking lot, I braced myself before entering. The door chime rang as I set down my keys and forced a smile for the morning rush. A few regulars sat at the counter. No suits, no staring. The neon sign flickered as the last regular left. The door clicked shut behind me. My hands shook as I flipped the closed sign. Walking to the parking lot under the bruised sky, I half expected to see the man leaning against my car. But there was nothing. Just John's Prius wrapped in fog at the curb. The neon sign hummed back to life. The espresso machine hissed as I wiped the bar top, wondering about the man in the fog. Beans dropped into the grinder as I handed a cappuccino to Marisol. She studied my face. "You okay? You look tired," I shrugged. "Long night." My gaze drifted to the empty booth where John and the stranger had sat. A prickle crawled up my neck. Someone watching from outside. Through the window, only mist and streetlight cones. I tossed my cloth into the rag bin and reached for more beans. Overhead lights felt harsh. I considered closing early, but opted for mellow jazz instead. Lunch passed. No one mentioned quarry lights or a man in a suit. It was as if last night had been erased, a silent agreement to forget. By evening, the memory had faded. At 9:15, I locked up, set the alarm, and walked to my car. The sky clear, stars steady. Driving away, I caught my reflection. Dark eyes, pale face, an unresolved question. Headlights on, fog behind me, waiting for something to blur the lines between what I'd seen and what I'd been told. Just before dawn at the White Sands test range, I heard the rumble. Overcast sky, thick gray clouds low enough to tint the rising sun. I'd camped in my car by the observation bunker, waiting. Mia Jensen, freelance aerospace journalist, chasing missile launches for 2 years. At 6:02 a.m., the alert horn sounded. I raised my DSLR, framing the pad through the bunker's slit window. A bright flash, the missile's contrail cut through clouds like a white ribbon. Jet noise filled the air, deep roar turning to a distant whine as it climbed out of sight. I snapped a dozen shots, lowering the camera as the sound faded. That's when I saw it, a lone figure backlit by floodlights near the service road, shoulders squared at attention. Here's the rewritten text. The morning was gray and still. My camera hung ready as I scanned the empty landscape. Something felt off. I'd been tracking a figure in a dark suit, barely visible against the muted background. No safety gear, just crisp clothing that seemed out of place. When I first spotted the person, they stood motionless near the fence. I zoomed in, then ducked out to investigate. By the time I reached the area, the test crew had vanished, leaving only gravel and scattered parachute fragments behind. The figure was gone. I circled the perimeter, searching every shadowy corner. No footprints, no crushed grass, nothing. My heart raced as I tapped my radio. "Range control, this is Jensen. Do you have an observer at the south fence?" Silence. Just as I started walking back, a soft click broke the quiet. I spun around. Under the flood lamp stood a man in an impossibly crisp black suit. White shirt, narrow tie, shoes polished to an unnatural shine. His posture was too perfect, like a mannequin carefully positioned. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "this area is off limits." I held up my press badge. "Defense Tech Weekly. I have permission for photos." He shook his head. "Permission revoked. Please return to the bunker." His face was strange, no expression, yet not unfriendly. I glanced at the clock, 6:15. 10 minutes had passed, though it felt much longer. "I saw someone here before," I pressed. "A dark suit standing at the fence. Did you see them?" He checked his watch. "No, now please step away." I raised my camera, hoping for a quote. He smiled, just a slight mouth movement, and shook his head. "Are you going to comply?" Something made the hair on my arms prickle. I lowered the camera and stepped back. He nodded, turned, and glided, not walked, into the shadows behind the service road. No sound from his shoes. I watched until he vanished completely. Returning to the bunker, my mind buzzed. The test crew was gone. Vans pulled away, the door locked, empty, completely empty. I drove down to the main gate at 7 a.m. The security guard looked puzzled. I showed my pass, but he informed me about a range closure. "You must have missed the memo," he said. I insisted there was no memo, and he shrugged, punching in the gate code. Back on the highway, I reviewed the photos. The missile blasts appeared fine, bright arcs cutting through the cloud cover. But something caught my eye, a dark blur in the corner of every fence line shot, a shape like a standing figure, then vanished. I zoomed in. The blur had fabric-like edges, but no discernible detail, disappearing in the next frame. At 8:15, I called my editor, my voice trembling as I tried to describe the man in black I'd seen under the flood lamp. She explained the range was locked down for hypersonic tests, meaning they'd scrub any sensitive photos. When I asked about the guy in the suit, she told me to run the launch pictures and file the rest as shelf stock. I sat in a diner half a mile from the base, stirring my coffee. My camera bag rested beside me. Through the windows, I scanned the highway and scrub pines, half expecting to see him standing there. Nothing. I left my card with the waitress and walked to my car. A sealed manila envelope lay on the passenger seat, stamped with the date 6/12 and lacking a return address. Inside were 2 closely cropped prints from my fence line photos and a single slip of paper. No further explanation. I folded the contents, tucked them into the glove box, and drove home feeling like I'd just emerged from a half-remembered dream. The highway stretched ahead, yellow lines fading into dawn. I kept anticipating a glimpse of that dark figure in my rear view. Perfect posture, black suit, unblinking eyes. But he never appeared. I just kept driving until city lights rose on the horizon. Just before sunrise, I stepped out of the cabin. The sky was a pale slate blue, low clouds hanging over the pines. Baxter, my mutt, trotted at my heel, ears alert for wildlife. I'd walked this 2-mile loop through National Forest near Cedar Creek for years, but something felt different that morning. The air was damp, as if it had rained overnight, and the usual bird sounds were eerily quiet. We followed the dirt path to a fork near a small brook. Baxter splashed in the shallow water while I wrung out my shirt sleeve and sipped from my canteen. That's when I saw it, a break in the landscape. The forest trail was familiar, but something caught my eye. A clearing I'd never noticed before, tucked just off to the left. Wet ground squished under my boots as I pushed through branches, emerging into a space about 20 feet across. Half a dozen mature oaks and maples surrounded me, each trunk bearing an identical, unsettling mark. From ground level to exactly 6 feet high, every tree's bark had been stripped away with impossible precision. The exposed wood looked smooth and pale, as if carefully shaved clean. No rough edges, no bark fragments littered the ground, just perfect horizontal lines encircling each trunk. Baxter hung back at the clearing's edge, hackles raised. I stepped closer to the nearest oak, running a finger along its surface, cool and almost slick, with no sign of tool marks or cutting. No explanation made sense. A chill ran down my spine. I scanned the area carefully. No footprints marred the mud. No broken branches suggested human presence. My flashlight beam swept across untouched fallen leaves. Something felt deeply wrong. Baxter whimpered, refusing to enter the circle. Shah, king his head as if the ground burned. Realizing I had no phone signal, I clicked the device off. Circling the clearing, I confirmed the height was exactly the same on each tree, deliberate and unnatural. Who would do this? Why here, in the middle of nowhere? I called Baxter closer. He pressed against my leg, sensing my unease. Just as I prepared to leave, a soft sound like a breeze brushing needles caught my attention. But the air was completely still. Fog pressed close, muffling every sound. Birds remained silent. Even the distant brook seemed hushed. My flashlight revealed waving branches through low clouds, but nothing moved. No wind. An overwhelming feeling of being watched crept over me. I took one last look at the perfectly stripped bark, memorizing its crisp edge, then hurried back to the trail. Leaves crunched underfoot. Normal sounds gradually returned as I left the clearing's unnatural silence. The forest seemed to exhale, as if relieved by my departure. The cabin felt like a sanctuary after what I'd seen. I stumbled inside, door slamming shut behind me, Baxter's whine piercing the silence. His damp fur pressed against me as I clutched him close, sinking into a kitchen chair. A cup of tea warmed my shaking hands while I stared out the window, fog weaving between tree trunks. Did I imagine it? My chilled fingers suggested otherwise. I fired off a text to Aaron, my forestry friend. Ever heard of bark stripping like that? Perfect bands, no tracks, no damage. No response came. Night crept in. I kept the curtains drawn, checking locks repeatedly. Baxter shadowed me, nose twitching at unseen corners. A voicemail to the ranger station went unanswered. Dreams invaded my sleep, trees with smooth white bands bending, stepping closer on invisible roots. Baxter's whimper woke me. He climbed onto the bed, watching the darkness outside with alert eyes. Morning brought clarity. Notebook and tape measure in hand, I returned to the clearing. Sunrise cut through lingering fog, but the light band had vanished. A thin, papery bark now covered the wood, scabby, irregular. The 6 feet mark barely visible, worn by night's moisture. Light-colored flakes clung to roots, disintegrating at my touch. I documented everything, noting how leaves looked subtly changed, edges curled, colors paler near the tree line. Baxter refused to enter the clearing's center just like before. Photos taken, GPS coordinates marked, I backed away. The forest resumed its normal rhythm, birds singing, breeze rustling. At home, I sorted the images. My phone's first set showed dark trunks, the clearing's ring solid brown. The old point-and-shoot revealed something different. Pale rings, slightly askew. Something was waiting. Something had changed. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but the signal was weak. The stars hung motionless, pinned against the navy sky like a frozen photograph. Highway 50 stretched before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through eastern Colorado's darkness. It was late August, around 1:45 a.m., and the night air felt crisp at about 55 degrees. My car's engine hummed steadily at 65, windows cracked open. I'd been counting constellations to pass the time, searching for Orion's belt. Something felt off. I'd driven maybe 20 miles since my last sky check, but the stars hadn't shifted. Cassiopeia's familiar curve remained fixed, the Big Dipper unchanged. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I'd dozed off, but nothing moved. Slowing to 50, I watched roadside markers slide past. The horizon, just grassland and scattered scrub oaks, should have been shifting relative to the stars. Instead, everything remained locked in place, like a static image behind my windshield. My heart raced. I keyed the CB mic on channel 19. Anybody out there? Static was my only response. The hissing filled the car's silence. I gripped the wheel, driving another 5 miles, trying to shake off my growing unease. Weeks earlier, I'd been hiking a trail with Baxter. One photo from that day stood out, a shot of him sniffing near some cut tree edges. In the top right corner, a faint, out-of-focus swirl shimmered like lens condensation. Zooming in revealed nothing. No shape, no color, just a blur invisible in the live view. I've returned to that trail twice since. Each time the ground looked normal. No 6-foot rings, no bark fragments, no odd fog patches. Baxter stayed close, ears forward, sniffing branches without whining. The photos remain on my desk. Sometimes I study the close-up of Baxter in the clearing, staring at that faint sky swirl. I still don't know what stripped those trees or why Baxter refused to cross that line. I can't explain why the bark seemed to regrow overnight. But I remember the hush of that circle, how the air bent around it, and how I fled without casting a single fishing line into my morning calm. I drove east, pulling back onto the highway after backing slowly off the turnout, watching the puddle's reflection in the rear view as stars traced their arc. The engine fired on the first crank when I stepped back into the car and locked the doors. Every time I closed my eyes, the internal image of moving stars hovered in my mind. When I opened them, the real sky remained as steady as a photograph. I scanned the horizon, seeing no lights or shapes, just a silent prairie under a frozen sky. I backed away from the puddle, feeling a weight in my chest and a sense of nausea. I slapped my sleeve and blinked, but it was real. The sky and its inverted twin were decoupled. One stood motionless while the other moved on its own schedule. I pressed a fingertip to the water's surface, and a ripple erased part of the reflection. When the water calmed, the reflected stars reformed in new positions farther along their path. My breath caught. Both images, real and puddle, remained in perfect focus. The reflected stars marched against the still backdrop of the actual stars. 3 stars of Orion slid westward across the mirror surface at the pace I expected them to cross the real sky, but the actual sky stayed fixed. I shone my phone's flashlight on the water. The stars were mirrored there. Yes, but they moved. I watched the puddle's reflection shift slowly, almost imperceptibly. Overnight rain had filled the shallow ditch with a couple inches of water where I'd left my floor mat to air dry. The thought of turning around crossed my mind, but I felt too uncertain to move. I needed to see something else. A cold breeze drifted across the plains, rustling the grass. Every celestial fixture stayed exactly where it had been. I waited 1 minute, then 2. The stars flickered bright in the silent air, punctuated only by distant crickets and the lingering echo of my idling engine. I stared upward, leaning against the hood. My phone showed no signal when I checked. Darkness had dropped so thick it felt like velvet. I had killed the engine and turned off the headlights after pulling over at a turnout just past milepost 213. The road was deserted, without even a guardrail, just gravel and a shallow drainage ditch. The weekend started like any other camping trip. Alina and I had driven deep into the Cascades, seeking silence away from the constant buzz of technology. Early September offered that perfect transition between summer's warmth and fall's crisp edge. We'd found a secluded clearing surrounded by towering fir and cedar trees, their branches weaving a dense canopy that nearly blocked out the sky. By 6:30 p.m., our tent was up and we were settling into the rhythm of wilderness. Elena unpacked the cooler while I gathered firewood, our movements unhurried and comfortable. As the sunlight softened and began to fade, we prepared for a simple evening. Sausages over the fire, hot cocoa afterward. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows across the ground and tree bases. We sat close, backs against the cool tree trunks. Elena hummed softly, absently poking the flames with a stick. Something felt different about the woods that night. Not the usual forest sounds, but a stillness that seemed to hold its breath. The quiet was so profound it made you strain to listen. That's when I first heard my name. A whisper, just Jason, soft and clear, coming from somewhere beyond the tree line, maybe 50 feet away. No echo, no repetition, just my name, carried on the faintest breeze. Later, driving home, the experience felt surreal. Headlights cutting through darkness, the engine's steady hum providing a sense of normalcy. My phone found signal around milepost 208, just 1 bar, enough to make a call. But what would I even say? By the time I reached Lemon, the sky was changing. Stars that had seemed fixed were now creeping westward. I pulled into a 24-hour diner parking lot, sat with the engine idling, watching. The earlier puddle reflection was gone, replaced by dry gravel. As dawn approached, I drove home in silence. Pulling into my driveway, I cut the engine and sat in the pastel light, wondering about the boundary between reality and something else. We'd been in those woods for almost 3 hours when everything began to shift. I was hiking alone in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, late September of 2022. My name's Emma Collins, and I usually spend a good chunk of my weekends on trail, especially in the fall when the leaves turn. That year, I'd taken a few days off work and decided to tackle a less traveled route. This time, I wasn't alone. Elena was with me, and we both heard something strange that night. At first, it was just a whisper. I asked Elena if she heard it, and she nodded silently. We scanned the shadows between the trees, but saw nothing. No movement, no glowing eyes, just darkness. We thought maybe another camper was calling out, so we yelled back. No response came. Then it happened again, and this time it was different. Our names were whispered, one right after the other. Jason, Elena. The voices were soft, almost like someone was leaning in close, but there was no one near us. Our skin prickled. We sat completely still, our eyes darting through the tree line. The voices were weird, not strained or distant, but almost as if someone was right beside us. Yet there was no one. No movement, no light, just the faint crackling of our campfire. I checked my phone. It was 9:13 p.m., and predictably, there was no signal. We decided to pack up and hike back, thinking it might be a prank or some animal making strange noises. The moment we zipped the tent and stood up, the whispering stopped. Our walk out was silent, with only the sound of our boots crunching dry leaves. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following us, but the woods remained still. When we reached the parking area, we both exhaled, releasing tension we hadn't realized we'd been holding. Elena laughed nervously. "That was something," she said. I agreed, but my mind was stuck on those whispers. They didn't sound like an echo or wind. The entire journey home, an unsettling feeling lingered, like we'd been watched by something unseen. It wasn't just hearing our names. It was how the forest had changed around us, how silence had swallowed every sound. I'm not sure I'll return to that spot soon. But at night, when I close my eyes, those whispers return, faint enough to make me question whether it was real or just a trick of memory. I was hiking a 3-mile loop trail near Franconia Notch State Park when something strange happened. The morning was cool and crisp, with early autumn's hint hanging in the air. Sunlight filtered through treetops, breaking up the partly cloudy sky as I walked through the mostly wooded path. The forest was quiet, punctuated by typical woodland sounds, birds chirping, my boots crunching leaves, and occasional rustling from small creatures. About an hour into my hike, I paused by a small stream clearing to drink water. That's when I spotted the stone. Half hidden under fallen leaves and twigs, it looked unusual, perfectly circular and smooth, like a hockey puck with a glassy yet matte surface more uniform than a river stone. I picked it up casually, not expecting anything remarkable. The moment it touched my palm, I felt a faint vibration, a low, almost imperceptible hum. More a sensation through my skin than a sound. It was barely audible yet distinctly present. Tilting the stone near my ear, the humming became slightly clearer, steady and soft, almost soothing. I glanced around. The trail was empty. Puzzled but curious, I slipped the stone into my jacket pocket and continued walking. For the next half hour, a quiet buzz seemed to emanate from the stone. I couldn't tell if it was real or imagined, but each time I reached into my pocket, I felt its presence. Something began to feel off. I realized I'd passed a trail junction marker earlier than expected. The trees seemed denser, the path less defined. I wasn't lost, but something was different. Pulling out my phone to check GPS, I noticed the signal was weak, typical for these woods. The humming grew stronger, almost responsive to my surroundings. I made a curious observation. The hum intensified when I slowed down and faded when I walked faster. It was as if the stone was somehow reacting to my movements, alive in a way I couldn't comprehend. The forest was eerily silent. No rustling leaves, no chirping birds, no buzzing insects, just an unnatural stillness that felt like the woods were holding their breath. The branches seemed thicker, more imposing, and a strange quiet hung in the air. I held the stone, feeling a steady hum vibrating through my fingers. Something about this moment felt off. When I stepped forward toward a bend in the trail where sunlight peeked through the branches, the humming abruptly stopped, as if someone had flipped a switch. Curious, I experimented. Moving forward past a certain point made the stone go completely silent. Stepping back brought the low, steady hum rushing back. An invisible boundary seemed to exist, with the stone acting as some kind of strange indicator. The trail ahead led into darker, denser trees. I hesitated, feeling a subtle pressure from the stone itself, almost as if it was urging me not to proceed. A faint sense of unease crept over me. After a moment of deliberation, I turned back toward the clearing where I'd originally found the stone. As soon as I crossed that invisible line, the humming resumed. I tucked the stone into my pocket, walking quickly. The forest felt different now. Shadows seemed to linger unnaturally, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I made it back to the parking lot just before dusk, my pace quickened by an inexplicable sense of urgency. Later attempts to research the stone yielded nothing. No local legends, no geological matches. It sits in a box on my shelf now, silent and mysterious. The stone no longer hums, but I know what happened that day on the trail was real. Something extraordinary occurred, something I cannot explain. The sheep were frozen in an unnaturally tight circle, staring straight up at the sky. It was just past midnight, and I was out in the fields doing my usual check before heading home. The late spring night was clear and cold, with moonlight spreading pale across the pasture. This wasn't normal. Typically, the sheep would graze or wander in small groups, but tonight they stood perfectly still, their heads raised and eyes fixed on something I couldn't quite understand. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me, but no, they were definitely focused on a single point. The shape was unlike anything I'd seen before. A black blot against the moonlight, it didn't reflect or shine. Instead, it seemed to absorb light like a hole in the sky. When I looked closer, I saw it was big and roughly rectangular, with blurry edges that seemed to shift and move in a way I couldn't quite define. Something felt wrong. My skin prickled with a cold, static-like sensation. A faint, low hum hung in the air, not like wind, but something else entirely. The sheep remained motionless, even when I shifted or tried calling out. My voice sounded strange, muffled, and distant in the open field. Then a pressure built in my head, light but distinct, like gentle fingers pressing against my temples. For a moment, the shape seemed to fold or split, though when I blinked, it was just a flat, dark mass blocking the stars. No light passed through it, and the moonlight stopped abruptly at its edges. I wanted to move closer, but my legs felt stiff. The silent boundary seemed to whisper a warning. Something had changed, and I knew right then I would never finish that hike. The night held its breath, and so did I. Part of me wanted to retreat to the house, but another part remained frozen, transfixed by this silent presence that seemed out of place. The wind had gone completely still, and the usual night sounds vanished. No crickets chirped, no distant dogs barked, no leaves rustled. Just a deep silence punctuated by a faint hum I felt more than heard. My phone went dead when I tried to capture a picture. The screen blacked out and the flashlight refused to work, despite being fully charged earlier. I stepped back toward the house, glancing behind me. The sheep stood motionless, their eyes fixed upward. Inside, the house felt unnaturally cold. Through the window, I could see a black shape in the field, absorbing moonlight as if it had swallowed that section of sky. Suddenly, the sheep scattered, bolting toward the barn like something had startled them. I rushed outside to investigate, but the shape had vanished. The field showed no signs of disturbance, just damp grass and undisturbed soil. Over the next few days, I watched the field at night. The sheep would occasionally huddle together, staring skyward, quiet and still. They seemed to be waiting for something beyond my perception. When I shared the story with neighbors, they dismissed it as a dream or joke. The local vet suggested animals might sense unusual weather, but the sky was clear and conditions normal. I couldn't explain what I'd seen. It wasn't a cloud, drone, or plane, nothing I'd ever encountered before. This mysterious shape simply sat there, absorbing moonlight, watching us, while the sheep stared as if they understood something I didn't. Since that night, I'm always scanning the sky during late evenings. I haven't seen anything similar again. But sometimes, when the sheep fall silent in the middle of the night, I find myself looking out the window, wondering if that dark presence might return. The sky was clear, with only a few wisps of cirrus clouds, and the air felt crisp and calm. I've done plenty of flying for work and pleasure, mostly around Nevada and California. This particular trip was nothing out of the ordinary, just a quick run to drop off some paperwork in Las Vegas before heading back to Reno. Cruising at 7,500 feet in a straight line southwest from Groom Lake toward Las Vegas, I was in my Cessna 182, alone in the cockpit with the autopilot engaged and instruments under watch. The radio hummed with occasional routine check-ins from flight control. About 40 minutes into the flight, something unusual caught my attention on the right wing tip. Initially, I thought it was a reflection. The sun was hitting the wing at a sharp angle, potentially creating a misleading glare. But this wasn't a typical optical illusion. A perfectly smooth, mirror-like shape hovered about 100 feet off my right wing. Adjusting my sunglasses, I leaned forward for a closer look. The object was roughly the size of a small car, maybe slightly smaller. No visible edges or seams, just a featureless, reflective surface that mirrored the sky and wing beneath it with uncanny precision. It was like looking into a polished metal sheet, except this wasn't part of the plane. I double-checked my instruments, altimeter steady, airspeed normal. The plane remained stable with no unexpected turbulence. My heart rate quickened, not from fear but pure surprise. In all my years of flying, I'd never encountered anything like this. Reaching for the radio, I tried to see if anyone else had reported something in the area. Silence. No chatter, no traffic reports. I switched to the transponder, using code 1200 for visual flight. The radar showed nothing, no blips anywhere near me. Pulling back the throttle slightly, I watched the object maintain its exact position at my wingtip. It didn't move or flicker, instead staying perfectly positioned and matching my speed and heading as if locked in place. I turned the plane slightly left, testing whether it would break formation. It didn't. The object mirrored my moves with flawless precision. I grabbed my phone, attempting to film through the small side window, but the reflection on the glass and the plane's speed rendered the image useless, just a blur of sky. I was flying my usual route when something caught my eye near the wing. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The object hovered silently beside me, perfectly mirroring the sky's reflection. No engine noise, no lights, no vibrations, just this smooth, mirror-like shape. I tried calling flight control. Control, this is N123DP. Do you have any traffic in my vicinity? Nothing. I checked the onboard radar scope, completely blank, no targets within a 20-mile radius. My mind raced with possible explanations. A drone? Too big and too smooth, with no visible engines or propellers. A weather balloon? They don't hover or match speed like this. Some atmospheric effect? The sky was crystal clear, and the object was incredibly well defined. For what seemed like several minutes, it remained motionless. Then, after about 7 minutes, it slowly pulled away from my wingtip. It shimmered briefly, and then vanished into the distance as if it had never existed. I double-checked everything. My instruments and plane felt normal. No warning lights, no system faults. When I landed in Las Vegas, I immediately investigated. The FAA traffic logs showed nothing unusual. The tower controller confirmed no reported incidents. I shared the story with my fellow crew members, but most dismissed it as a trick of the light or my imagination. Yet something nagged at me. How clear and solid it had looked. How the compasses and instruments remained unaffected. Driving home that night, I noticed a subtle hum in the car's stereo system, not from the speakers, but underneath. When I turned everything off, the sound disappeared. In the days that followed, I repeatedly checked my flight log and plane instruments. No errors. But late at night, when I glanced at the wingtip, I sensed that strange presence again. Something watching, just out of sight. It was the only time I've ever encountered something so clearly out of place in the sky, yet which left no trace except in my memory. The cold Montana morning was still, with a fresh inch of powder coating everything after a recent cold front. Parking at the edge of a clearing on Forest Road 611, I dropped my pack and breathed in the sharp pine-scented air. My name's Carson Hale, and these woods are familiar territory. Something felt different from the start. At first light, I found the tracks, a deer's steady walk, 2 front and 2 back hooves leaving a clear path. Carefully, I followed into the pines, avoiding any noise that might break the morning's silence. Overhead, snow-laden branches arched like a canopy, with early sunlight filtering through and illuminating tree trunks like golden lanterns. My watch read 7:12 a.m., and my phone stayed off. In cold country, distractions are the last thing you want. Bird songs faded as I moved through a stand of young firs, and suddenly the forest went completely quiet. No wind, no birds, just the sound of my own breathing. Scanning the landscape, I expected to see a buck or coyote, but nothing moved. A small depression in the snow caught my eye, a shallow bowl as if something heavy had rested there. I shrugged and continued. The deer tracks led downhill to a frozen creek bed with glazed clear ice. My gaiters snapped against the snow as I followed the prints. They dipped onto the ice, slid forward slightly, then continued without hesitation. The deer was pushing hard, likely heading toward open ground and a spring downstream. Climbing the far bank into a wide meadow, I found wind-scoured snow and patches of hard crust among bare grass. Ravens had been scavenging near a cluster of rocks, their droppings dotting the white landscape. No fresh pellets or feathers disturbed the empty calm. Almost reflexively, I unzipped my jacket for another layer, despite not feeling cold. Halfway across the field, something unusual emerged. A second set of tracks overlapped the deer's men's hunting boots, size 10, pointing in the same direction. Whoever was following seemed to be trailing, not chasing. Their steps were slow and deliberate, matching the deer's path with an unsettling precision. I moved carefully through the snow, my footsteps crunching softly. The tracks ahead were clear and purposeful, cutting a straight line across the meadow's center. Something felt off. The silence was absolute. No crows called, no wind stirred. Even the snow beneath my boots seemed muted, as if the air itself was dense and heavy. Raising my binoculars, I scanned the landscape. Nothing moved, no figures, no disturbance along the tree line. About 80 yards ahead, the tracks simply ended where the ground sloped gently toward a hidden ravine. I crouched and examined the snow closely. No return prints, no boot marks stumbling down the slope, no disturbed snow crystals. It was like someone had vanished into thin air. The deer's hoof prints merged with the mysterious boot prints at this point, then continued forward into the brush. I stood and tested the snow around the track's end. Firm crust. When I stepped, I sank an inch. Everywhere else gave 2 or 3 inches under my weight. The ground here felt different, colder. Holding my gloved hand an inch above the surface, I felt a sudden draft like a trapped mini blizzard. Unease crept over me. My heart raced, but curiosity held me in place. I searched for any sign, twig breaks, cloth scraps, nothing. I lifted snow to check the grass underneath, untouched. Something was wrong. I should have left, but something kept me rooted. I marked the GPS coordinates, 48.291 degrees N, 114.498 degrees W. The horizon showed only pines to the north, a hill to the south. The world was a blank white canvas. No cabin lights, no road sounds, pure silence. I tied a cloth strip high on a nearby tree to mark the spot. It snapped sharply in the windless air, the sound startlingly loud. As I turned to follow the deer tracks, they curved south, skirting the meadow's edge and disappearing into dense woods. My stomach knotted. I'd lost the deer, but I didn't want to return to the forest alone. The open field felt too empty, as if something watched from the trees. Dread spread slowly, like ice creeping under my collar. I shifted my pack and followed the deer tracks out of the meadow, every sense alert. The forest came back to life, a row on me. Woodpeckers tapped, chickadees chattered overhead. My breath hung in the cold air as I snapped a branch, testing my gun's zero. Nothing seemed out of place, but something felt off. The tracks I'd found ended too cleanly, too intentionally. No explanation made sense. I moved downhill toward the creek, my heart racing faster than I wanted to admit. By 9:10 a.m., I'd been out nearly 2 hours, my legs feeling rubbery from the trek. At the tree line, I eased off my pack and dropped it on the log where I'd left it earlier. One last look at the meadow revealed nothing. No flags, no footprints, just unbroken white snow. The parking lot remained as empty as when I'd arrived. I tossed my shotgun and pack into the truck, sat down and closed my eyes. The engine idled, heater warming the cab. Silence surrounded me as I drove home. Damp wool scent filled the air, and my phone finally pinged, my wife asking about breakfast. "Yes, just give me 15, I replied. Inside the house, the heat felt overwhelming. I hung my coat and boots, washed my gloves in the sink, and tossed a cloth scrap from my pack into the trash. Morning light flooded the living room as I stared out the window. The road remained empty. Hours passed, and I kept glancing outside, half expecting something, anything, to appear. But the snow lay untouched. I pulled out my map, plotted the GPS point, zooming in to study the contour lines. Then I closed the map and sat back, listening to the house settle as wind began to howl outside. These prints still haunt me. I know the woods can hide countless secrets, animals, people, echoes of forgotten footsteps, but footprints ending in open snow with no return? I've spent my life tracking game, navigating wild places, yet nothing explains that empty field. Something doesn't add up. The forest was silent that morning, save for the soft rattle of pine needles in the breeze. I'm Carl Jensen, a state forestry worker, and something happened that day which I can't quite explain, and maybe never will. My job involves monitoring tree health, checking for diseases, and setting up environmental sensors. This particular day, I was working in a section of ponderosa pines near Flagstaff, Arizona, an area closed off due to wildfire risks. The morning was cool and clear, with that crisp mountain air that makes everything feel sharp and still. Around 9 a.m., something strange broke the quiet. A low, deep hum filled the air. Not like any machine I'd ever heard. It was steady, almost like a distant engine idling, but no equipment was visible. The sound seemed to come from just beyond a cluster of trees, maybe 50 yards away. Then I saw it. A smooth, dark shape slipped between the tree trunks. I can't call it an object, because it had no definable edges or form. Just a black mass, almost reflective in the scattered sunlight, moving with an unnatural, fluid grace. It glided silently, disappearing behind a thick stand of pines as quickly as it had appeared. The forest felt different afterward. The usual bird calls and wind sounds were muted, like everything was holding its breath. Part of me wanted to investigate, but another part warned me to stay put. I shook off the feeling and continued my work, checking sensors and taking readings. By lunchtime, I was back at the ranger station. The break room was quiet when a man walked in, someone who definitely didn't look like he belonged. He was clean-shaven, with short black hair slicked back, wearing a uniform with no identifying patches or logos. I haven't gone back to that spot yet. Maybe I will someday. Or maybe some tracks are better left covered, some stories untold. I was staying in a small converted woodshed behind a farmhouse in northern Vermont that winter, just outside Glover. After everything fell apart in Boston, I needed a cheap, quiet place. Just one room with a cot, a heater, a fire, and a desk. My backyard astronomy hobby had been keeping me focused, tracking mostly star fields, meteor showers, and occasional satellite flares. That afternoon started like any other. A man walked in wearing a plain black shirt and pants, an outfit that seemed more suited to security personnel or government agents than a forestry office. Without asking, he sat down at my table. When I glanced over expecting someone to intervene, I noticed no one else seemed to pay him any attention. He studied my equipment spread out on the table, a GPS, handheld weather meter, and various measuring tools. In a quiet but firm voice, he asked about equipment calibration, wanting to know if my instruments were within acceptable parameters. I hesitated, responding that everything seemed fine. He leaned in and cryptically mentioned that accuracy was crucial, warning that deviations could lead to unintended consequences. Before I could ask what he meant, he stood and left the room. When I turned back, he had vanished completely. The rest of the afternoon felt off. My GPS showed strange position jumps, as if I'd moved dozens of feet in an instant. The weather meter fluctuated erratically, and that deep, faint hum returned from beyond the tree line. On my way back to the truck, I caught another glimpse of a dark shape sitting motionless on a rock, almost camouflaged in the shadows. The moment our eyes met, it disappeared into the trees. I didn't mention the encounter to my fellow forestry workers. I wasn't even sure what to think myself. Since that day, strange lights have flickered between the pines at night. The low hum sometimes returns, even when no equipment is running. I can't help wondering if the man was warning me or checking on something I wasn't supposed to see. One thing is certain. This forest is far from ordinary. My telescope setup was modest. A used 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain mounted on a Skywatcher, positioned on a plywood platform behind my cabin. The location was perfect, far enough from town to escape light pollution, with winter nights offering some of the clearest skies I'd ever experienced. That Tuesday night felt special. I just received approval to work remotely for a Portland graphic design firm and celebrated with a simple beer and grilled cheese. Around 1:30 a.m., while studying the Orion Nebula, I noticed something unusual. A star to the northeast, one I'd seen before, suddenly blinked. This wasn't a typical atmospheric distortion. It was a hard, definitive blink, gone, then back. The pattern was strange. 3 quick flashes, a long pause, 2 more flashes, then silence. I spent the next hour meticulously tracking the star, checking everything. I swapped eyepieces, verified my power source, and reviewed my notes. Nothing explained what I'd witnessed. Eventually, I logged the incident and dismissed it as fatigue or a trick of light. 2 nights later, something even more bizarre occurred. Around 2 a.m., half dozing at my desk and waiting for cloud cover to clear, I glimpsed movement through the curtain. A man stood motionless just beyond the tree line, approximately 30 feet away. He was tall and extremely thin, wearing a black overcoat and dark slacks. His skin appeared almost bluish in the moonlight. What caught my attention was his equipment, a black telescope on a matching matte black tripod. No visible markings. He wasn't using my telescope. This was his own. At first, I wondered if someone from town was playing a prank, but something felt different. Something felt off. Snow had fallen fresh that afternoon, at least 2 inches deep, and the ground was perfectly undisturbed. For 10 minutes, I watched him standing motionless at the telescope, eyes fixed to the eyepiece, unmoving. No adjustments, no note-taking, just intense focus. Unsure what to do, I closed the blackout panel and sat on the floor. Colin, gee, the police seemed ridiculous. What would I even say? When I looked again before dawn, he remained in the same position. By sunrise, he had vanished. No tracks, no telescope, no evidence he'd ever been there. 2 days later, something strange appeared. Taped to the observatory window was a piece of black paper, bookmark-sized, with a perfect white circle centered precisely. No tape edges, no moisture damage despite the snow. It hadn't been there when I went to bed. I left it untouched for hours. By noon, it was gone. No wind, no footprints. The following week brought increasingly odd occurrences. Cabin power flickered continuously, never fully cutting out. My telescope mount began drifting slightly off alignment, resisting every recalibration attempt. One night, I found the scope inexplicably pointed toward the woods, though I hadn't touched it. Then came the whispering. Not voices exactly, but a mechanical hum at such a low frequency, I couldn't determine if it was in the air or inside my head. It only happened at night. My recordings always came out blank. Another night, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the snow around the cabin, circling, not approaching. I killed the lights and waited. Nothing. That's when sleep became impossible. I moved the telescope inside, locked the window, sealed the blackout panel from within, and started keeping a knife by the bed. Something I despised, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. On my final night, the stars simply disappeared. Not obscured by clouds, just gone. Around 11 p.m., I stepped outside to check the satellite dish after a dropped connection, and the sky was different. The river behind my cabin runs wide and slow through the northern Minnesota woods, miles from the nearest town. I've been a wildlife photographer for years, mostly freelance, working on small assignments or personal projects. Late one summer evening, the sky faded to an orange-gray light that photographers know can be tricky but rewarding if you're patient. I was sitting on a fallen log near the water's edge, camera mounted on a tripod, aimed at a bend where trees cast long shadows. For about an hour, I'd been capturing images of birds landing on branches and a beaver swimming by. Later, when I started unloading the photos, something caught my eye. In several shots, dark, irregular shapes floated just beneath the river's surface. They weren't like rocks or logs. These forms were smooth, matte, almost like shadows but more solid. Strangely, they remained unchanged between frames, even as the water moved around them. Initially, I dismissed it as a camera glitch or a trick of the light and deleted the shots. The next day, I returned to the same spot at the same time. The shapes appeared again. I zoomed in and tried different angles, but they remained constant, just below the surface. unmoving and distinctly odd. When I mentioned this to a friend, he joked about river spirits, but something felt off. 2 nights later, I was on my porch editing photos, laptop open, surrounded by the quiet woods. Crickets chirped softly, punctuated by the river's gentle rush. Suddenly, a car crunched up the gravel driveway, unexpected given how remote my cabin was. That wasn't the first strange occurrence. Months earlier, I'd been stargazing with my telescope. The night was clear but moonless, completely black. After waiting 15 to 20 minutes, the stars suddenly reappeared. Same positions, same brightness, as if they'd never vanished. The morning after that night, I packed everything into my truck and left before sunrise. I didn't say goodbye to the farmhouse owners. I just drove. That was a year ago, and I haven't used the telescope since. A car pulled up outside my cabin, its make and model unfamiliar. Given the late hour, unexpected visitors were unlikely. A man stepped out, wearing a black suit that seemed out of place, no tie, but a crisp white shirt and polished shoes. Without hesitation, he approached the porch, bypassing any traditional greeting. "Can I help you?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. His smile lacked warmth. "I apologize for the intrusion," he began, "but I'm interested in some photos you've taken." Confusion washed over me. What photos? He pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open without revealing its contents. "I believe you have images capturing certain anomalies in the nearby river," he continued. "I'd like to review your camera's memory card." I stepped back, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "I don't think that's necessary," I responded. He nodded, seemingly ignoring my protest, and swiftly removed the SD card from my camera. Realizing I hadn't locked the door, panic started to rise. "Please put that back," I insisted. Silence. He turned the card over in his fingers, weighing it thoughtfully. Then, in a quiet voice, he spoke. "Water keeps its own secrets. Sometimes those secrets aren't meant to be uncovered." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm air. "Who are you?" I asked. After a moment's hesitation, he replied, "Just someone who wants to help you avoid trouble." The porch light flickered, and the surrounding woods seemed to darken unnaturally. When I looked back, he was still examining the card. Moving closer, I demanded, "Give that back." Without a word, he returned the card to my camera and handed it over. As quickly as he'd arrived, he got back in his car and drove away. I locked the door and sat down, the camera still warm in my hands. The thought of calling the police crossed my mind, but what would I say? A strange encounter with no clear threat. The next day, I returned to the river, determined to understand the mysterious shapes. The water appeared normal, clear and slow, but when I looked through my camera's viewfinder, those same shapes emerged, lurking just beneath the surface. I captured more images, and later that night, examined them closely on my laptop. As I zoomed in, the details became increasingly unsettling. It was late October, a Thursday, and I was driving home from work through the outskirts of New Richmond, Wisconsin. The sky was mostly clear, but there was a cool, damp feeling in the air, like the kind of chill that clings to your skin when the sun's just dipped below the horizon and the night is starting to settle in. I was a few miles past the local power plant, the large coal-fired one that everyone in town jokes about, but relies on when I notice something off. I'd been on that stretch of road 100 times before, usually quiet and uneventful. That evening, though, just after 7 p.m., I spotted some odd lights hovering over the power plant. They weren't the usual work lights or warning beacons on the towers. These lights were smaller, brighter, and arranged in a pattern that didn't make sense for normal equipment. They moved slowly but deliberately, like they were surveying or scanning the facility. I pulled over to the side of the road. Shapes looked like they were made of something solid, but dark. No reflection, no texture, just shapes that didn't belong in the water. After that, I started noticing other things. At night, when I went outside to check the perimeter, I'd catch glimpses of movement between the trees, always too quick to identify. Sometimes my phone would die suddenly when I tried to call or text. The river sometimes made a low hum like a vibration under the water, but only at dusk and only near where I'd been photographing. I didn't tell anyone except a few friends who thought I was imagining things or stressed out from being alone all the time. But I knew something had changed. The man's words stayed with me. Water keeps its own secrets. I haven't gone back to the river after dark since. His shapes are still there in the photos, always just below the surface, like silent watchers. Sometimes when the wind is still and the river moves quietly, I swear I can feel something watching me from the trees. But when I turn, there's nothing but shadows. I keep thinking about that man in black and his warning about how some things are better left undisturbed. I'm not sure what the river is hiding, but I'm pretty sure it's not natural. I'm writing this because I want someone else to know. Maybe there's something out there paying attention to the quiet places we forget. Maybe some secrets are alive and they don't want to be found. I was driving along the road, my curiosity peaked, but my guard up. No headlights, window cracked open to listen. Something felt off about the atmosphere. The air carried a mix of familiar and strange scents, ozone, burning coal, and an unfamiliar metallic sharpness. Lights blinked in what seemed like a deliberate pattern, not random, not warning, but almost like a coded message. My phone started acting weird when I tried to take a picture. The screen glitched and flickered, so I put it away. I watched as the lights moved slowly around the plant's perimeter, then vanished behind a cooling tower. Suddenly, a car pulled up behind me. No headlights, just a dark shape. Quiet engine. A man's face appeared in the rolled-down window, mid-40s, clean-shaven, slicked-back black hair, wearing a dark suit that looked out of place in this town. "Evening," he said. His voice was professional, neither friendly nor threatening, just cold and measured. "Evening," I replied. "Do you work at the power plant?" "No, just passing through. I work downtown on Main Street." He nodded. Another car arrived. A second man stepped out, similar build, black suit, pale skin, looking like he never saw daylight. The first man leaned closer. "What time exactly did you see the lights?" "About 7:10, heading home from work. They were hovering over the northern cooling towers." "How long did they stay?" "Maybe 5 minutes. Then they moved behind the towers and disappeared." The second man stepped forward, hands folded calmly. "Did you see any workers? Maintenance crews?" "No, it was completely quiet. Just those lights." A heavy silence hung between us. Then the first man asked to see my phone. I refused. He didn't push, which made me even more nervous. Something wasn't right. I'm just a local, curious about what I'd seen. Those lights weren't normal, not by a long shot. The first time I saw something odd was near the power plant. 2 men approached me, and their demeanor made it clear they wanted absolute silence about whatever had occurred. The second man nodded slowly. "We understand it's important that no one else talks about this," he said. The company was already aware and handling the situation. A small badge emerged from the first man's jacket. Not quite a police badge, more like a government ID. The details were blurred in the dim light, and I couldn't make out specifics. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said flatly, "and your discretion." They drove away in cars without visible license plates. The second car pulled ahead and vanished first, followed by the first. The road fell silent again, and I sat there, unsettled by the feeling of being watched in a way that made my skin crawl. When I told Mark about the encounter, he was naturally skeptical. "Probably just some government agents or company security making sure you don't spread rumors," he suggested. But something didn't feel right. Strange occurrences began to pile up. My phone started acting weird, dropping calls and messages without explanation. Once, driving past the plant in daylight, I spotted a black SUV near the gate, windows tinted so dark it looked like a black hole. No one was inside. Nights became increasingly unsettling. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps outside my apartment window. When I looked, nothing was there. But the streetlight flickered oddly, and that metallic smell returned. I started taking a longer route home, adding 20 minutes to my commute just to avoid that stretch of road. Weeks passed quietly until one late evening at the office. Nearly 10 p.m., the building empty except for me. I glanced out the window and glimpsed a dark figure in the street lamp's shadows. But when I looked again, nothing remained. I can't shake the memory of those lights, those men, and that mysterious badge I never fully saw. Something larger seems to be happening, something I'm not meant to understand. I worked the late shift at the old radio tower on the edge of Millbrook, a small town in upstate New York. It was early November, and the night had settled in heavy and quiet, with a cold fog rolling in from the river just a mile away. The tower wasn't much, just a rusty metal structure with a cramped room at the top where I managed local emergency broadcasts for a handful of nearby communities. That night started like any other. I arrived around 9 p.m., grabbed my jacket, and climbed the spiral staircase to the broadcast room. Fog had thickened since dusk, and the windows were already streaked with condensation. Absolute silence surrounded me, broken only by the soft hum of equipment and occasional beeps from the transmitter. Around midnight, while doing routine checks, the radio began to crackle with static. At first it seemed normal, just interference from weather or a weak distant signal. But then the static grew louder, as if someone was forcefully pushing through with their own signal. It wasn't a recognizable code or message, just a low, drawn-out hiss that felt wrong. I adjusted the dials, trying to clear the sound, but the static remained, filling the room with an eerie white noise. It felt different, almost intentional. Leaning closer to the microphone, I stopped transmitting, hoping to hear it more clearly. That's when I saw him. Outside the window, just past the fog, stood a man on the metal catwalk surrounding the tower. He was dressed entirely in black, not work gear or a casual jacket, but a formal suit and tie. His hair was slicked back, his face pale and unnaturally smooth in the dim light. He didn't move like a normal person. Instead, he stood almost statuesque, with one exception. His hand raised, palm facing me, in a clear gesture to stop what I was doing. For a moment I thought I might be imagining things. Now I know about this experience, but I also recognize I'm probably just an ordinary person who stumbled onto something strange that night. Sometimes I drive past the plant, but I never stop, and I've never mentioned what I saw to anyone else. The room was dim, filled with thick fog and static that seemed to occupy every corner. I looked up and saw him standing there, unmoving, silently watching. His eyes were fixed on me, though I couldn't discern whether they were dark or reflecting the faint glow from the control panel. My first instinct was to reach for the radio and transmit, maybe call out. But the static suddenly rose up, cutting off my voice in a harsh burst. It wasn't just interference. The radio itself felt like it was warning me, drowning my words with an overwhelming hiss. Heart pounding, I pulled back from the microphone and grabbed my jacket. I watched him for a moment longer. Then, as quickly as he appeared, the man turned and stepped off the catwalk into the fog. The mist swallowed him completely. For a long time I sat listening to the static, the silence, the faint hum of the tower's machinery. The radio never fully cleared up. When the morning shift arrived, I shared what happened, the static, the mysterious figure. No one believed me. They suggested fatigue or fog-induced hallucinations. But this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. My phone began acting odd. Calls wouldn't connect, texts sent themselves blank. Sometimes the screen would flicker with static, even when powered off. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling watched, whether outside or driving home in the darkness. A few nights later, walking to my car in the tower's parking lot, I noticed a black sedan parked near the wood's edge. It was different from other vehicles around. Too clean, too polished. As I approached, two men in dark suits stepped out, moving with calm purpose. One looked directly at me and gave a small nod. I stopped, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. "You need to be careful what you say," one of them said quietly. "Some things are better left alone." Before I could respond, they got back into the car and drove away, leaving me standing in the cold, uncertain. I'm Mark Reynolds, 35, living in Portland, but always seeking out Oregon's remote corners. Late October had turned cold and damp, and I'd planned this weekend hike for weeks, a chance to escape city noise and deadlines. My destination was a trail near an old Cold War radar station in the Cascades, a spot mostly forgotten except by locals and occasional hikers like myself. As I set up camp just past the tree line, near where the radar installation once stood, the landscape was mostly ruins. Concrete foundations and rusted antenna pieces, the only reminders of what used to be. Around 7 p.m., a strange, low, deep hum caught my attention. It wasn't like any engine or animal sound I recognized, but a constant vibration that seemed to pulse through ground and air simultaneously. Curious, I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the tree line's edge. That's when I noticed the lights. Not ordinary ones, but small, pale bluish orbs gliding quietly beneath the trees. They flickered faintly, moving slowly in the shadows. Squinting into the dense forest, I struggled to count them or understand their origin. They didn't resemble people or any animals I knew. Later, the static began to worsen. My radio broadcasts would cut in and out, and sometimes, just before signing off, faint whispers seemed to drift through. Though I couldn't make out clear words, something made me pause. A man I'd seen outside the window, his strange movement, and his cryptic warning lingered in my mind. I never saw him or the two men again, but their presence remained. Each time I climbed the tower, an unsettling sensation of being watched took hold, as if the fog itself was anticipating something. Eventually, the static faded and broadcasts normalized, yet the feeling persisted. Now, on certain nights when the wind is just right and thick fog rolls in, I swear I can hear that same soft, steady hiss creeping back through the radio, like a warning emerging from somewhere just beyond the trees. The forest seemed normal enough during my hike, with just the usual sounds of leaves rustling and birds calling in the distance. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. But something had been nagging at me since that first night when I heard the strange, low hum near the radar site. Back at my small rented cabin, about 10 miles from the trailhead, I started noticing something odd. Every single night, precisely on the hour, a black sedan would drive past without any headlights. The first time, I thought it might be a mistake or a technical issue. I even tried to flag it down with my flashlight, but the car showed no response. No brake lights, no signals, just a steady, unchanging pace. This continued for 3 consecutive nights. Each time, the car would pass by my cabin at exactly the same time, moving at the same speed, always in complete darkness. The entire scenario felt surreal, like something from a strange movie. I checked for potential explanations, power outages, road issues, but everything else around seemed completely normal. Curious and slightly unnerved, I mentioned this to a local at a diner in town. His response was cryptic. When I described the car's behavior, no lights, precise timing, he just shrugged and said, "Around here, some folks keep an eye on that place. You never know." He didn't seem interested in elaborating. That same night, after the car's routine pass, I heard it again, that faint, distant hum. Standing by the window, I scanned the dark forest beyond the road, but saw nothing. The next day, I returned to the radar site during daylight, hoping to find some answers, but the area looked completely unremarkable. The Adirondacks in early fall can be deceptively quiet. I was hiking through Panther Gorge, a remote trail that promised solitude, hoping to enjoy one last day outdoors before winter set in. The sky hung low and gray, casting a muted light across the landscape. About midway through my loop, I entered a narrow section where the trees grew dense and the path shrank to little more than a dirt track. Something felt off immediately. The usual forest sounds vanished. No birds, no rustling leaves, just absolute silence. I stopped, listening intently. Then a flash caught my eye, brighter than a lightning bug, sharper than a camera's click. The forest seemed heavier, the air thicker. I scanned for those strange lights, but saw nothing definitive. When I returned to my campsite, something immediately struck me as odd. Several concrete slabs appeared freshly cracked, as if something substantial had recently pressed down on them. I photographed the damage, puzzled by what could have caused it. That night, an increasing sense of being watched prompted me to double-check every lock on the cabin's doors and windows. Just after midnight, a familiar low hum returned, more intense than before. It vibrated through the walls and floor, steady and unnerving. Looking outside, I spotted the black car again. This time it was parked across the street, engine off, lights extinguished. I watched, heart racing, as a dark-clothed figure emerged, standing perfectly still for a minute before returning to the vehicle. The car then drove away, still without lights. Sleep became impossible. The next morning, I packed quickly and left, trying to rationalize the experience as a local prank or some odd surveillance. Yet the memories lingered. The mysterious hum, the lights beneath the trees, the silent car. Weeks have passed, and I haven't returned to that area. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear that low hum when the wind blows just right. I can't explain what happened, but I know what I experienced was real. The uncertainty haunts me still. The forest trail was eerily quiet as I walked. No leaves crunched under my feet, no birds called out. The silence was so intense that every tiny sound felt magnified. A light flickered briefly, just off the trail, deep in the woods. I squinted into the shadows, but saw nothing. After about 10 minutes, the trail opened into a small clearing near the road leading back to the parking area. The sun was starting to dip lower, and I was eager to finish my hike before darkness fell. That's when I noticed the car. A plain black sedan sat on the side of the road, engine running but without lights. The driver's window was down, revealing a man who looked completely ordinary. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, dark hair slicked back, wearing a black suit with an open white collar. He looked directly at me, his expression calm and unreadable. "You okay?" he asked in a low, clear voice. I mumbled that I was just finishing my hike, my voice sounding strange in the stillness. "The forest keeps its secrets. Respect them," he said. Something about his tone suggested this wasn't just a casual comment, but a meaningful warning. Curious, I asked about the light I'd seen and the unusual silence. He shook his head slowly. "Not everything is meant to be understood. Sometimes the best thing is to walk away." Before I could press further, he closed the window, started the engine, and slowly pulled away. The car turned onto the road and disappeared around a bend. I stood there, feeling the cold creeping in, watching where the car had been. The strange silence remained with me even after I reached my car. Something about that moment didn't feel natural, but I wasn't sure I wanted to understand what had happened. Years later, my perspective would be shaped by my work as a night janitor at a restricted Air Force site in Nevada from 2004 to 2006. Experiences that would make this forest encounter seem almost ordinary by comparison. I've worked a lot of odd jobs, but this one was different. Not because of any paperwork I signed, but because people get weird when you talk about certain places. They think you're either making things up or losing your mind. I wasn't. I was just there to clean floors. My job came through a private contractor. They were selective, running background checks, polygraphs, and a tight security orientation. Every week, we'd fly in and out of a small civilian airfield near Tanapa, staying on base 4 nights. Standard protocol: no phones, no cameras, nothing that could transmit a signal. Most buildings looked completely ordinary: offices, labs, hangars, boring even. Concrete walls, metal surfaces, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The interesting stuff was always hidden, usually inside those hangars. We had assigned cleaning zones: trash collection, floor waxing, bathroom maintenance. Zones rotated weekly, but one building remained constant: Hangar 4C. You could see it from the mesh hall patio, a squat, that square structure built into red rock, windowless, with a single east side door. Not exactly secret, just overlooked. An older janitor named Lewis gave me early advice. Don't stare at 4C, don't ask about it, don't go near it. I thought he was joking until he added, "It hums." I didn't believe him at first, but during my 3rd month, working late one night behind the admin building, everything was eerily silent. No wind, no aircraft, nothing. Then I heard it, a faint, deep mechanical hum rising through the ground. Like a power transformer under heavy load, with a strange vibration that seemed to tickle your ears. I followed the sound. It grew more pronounced toward the complex's rockier back end. Passing 2 silent hangars, I approached 4C. No external lights, no vents, no wires, just solid matte black steel. The humming wasn't louder, but denser. I could feel it in my ankles. Standing 10 feet from the door, I noticed my breath fogging despite the warm mid-70s night. The base felt different that night. I was working a routine shift, counting supplies in a detached storage unit near 4C. Everything seemed normal until the humming started, louder than ever before. Metal shelving rattled as the overhead lights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Only the emergency exit signs remained, their light weak and fading. Lewis had warned me weeks earlier. "Don't linger near 4C, he'd said. "Some things in there have been running longer than this base has existed. Some things aren't ours." I'd thought he meant old tech, experimental engines, but something about how he spoke stuck with me. The air system went silent. That hum was all I could hear. When I stepped outside, the sky looked wrong. Orion was twisted as if someone had mirrored the constellation. The entire base was dark. No windows lit, no spotlights, no headlights. Weeks earlier, I'd seen another strange incident. A new hire stood near 4C at 2 a.m., hands pressed against the wall, seemingly listening. When I called out, he didn't respond. I had to tap his shoulder to ack his trance. He looked pale, confused. The next week he was gone, just another unexplained reassignment. Walking back to the main path, I tried to stay calm. No alarms, no announcements, just silence and that deep, persistent hum. As I passed 4C, a new sound emerged, breathing, not my own. Slow, steady inhalations, like something massive was drawing breath just beyond my perception. The area around the building always felt cold. My fingers would tingle near its doorless entrance, just a card reader with a keypad. I'd learned to keep my distance, aware of the cameras watching from every angle. I never told anyone about what I'd experienced, not even Lewis. But that night, everything changed. I used to work as an air traffic controller at a small FAA center on the Oregon coast near Newport back in 2009. At 29, I was 4 years into the job and had gotten comfortable with the rhythm of night shifts. These were quieter times, fewer planes, less chatter, mostly just cargo flights and occasional medevac runs to Portland. The center was bare bones. One main radar display room, a communications console, and a couple of workstations. On nights, it was usually just me and a supervisor, sometimes a third person if they were training someone. That particular night, it was just me and Dan Holloway. Dan had been doing this for almost 20 years and didn't talk much unless something needed fixing. We weren't friends exactly, but I trusted him. He was one of those people who never guessed. He either knew something or said nothing. It was late, just past 2 a.m. Clear skies, smooth night, with nothing on the scope except a UPS flight heading south along the coast and a corporate jet near Boise. I had a fresh cup of gas station coffee and was halfway through a crossword when something pinged on the screen. Just a blip at first, in the top right corner of the radar over open water. The return was tagged at 80,000 feet with no transponder. Not entirely unheard of. Sometimes military runs their stuff dark and we're not looped in. But this wasn't in any of the scheduled military corridors. I looked at Dan. He'd seen it too. He just raised his eyebrows, didn't say anything. I swear the air coming off that building was colder than ice. I didn't stop. I walked straight to the janitor's brake trailer and sat in the dark until the lights came back on about 20 minutes later. No one else said a word about it the next morning. I asked Lewis and he just looked at me and said, "You stayed out too long." A few months later, I got reassigned to Facility 7B full-time. I didn't argue. It was farther from the ridge. I didn't see 4C again. When I quit the job, they debriefed me in a little white room with no clocks. The guy across from me didn't have a nameplate. Just said, "You'll sign this and you'll never talk about anything you saw here." Understood. I signed, but I didn't see anything. Not really. I just heard it. Felt it. That low hum that seemed to come from under the world and the cold that stayed on your skin even after you left. That building's probably still there. Still locked. Still humming. The radar screen showed something odd. A signal at 80,000 feet suddenly dropped to sea level in less than a second. No gradual descent, just a complete vanish. I zoomed in, watching carefully. Ghost returns happen, but this was different. Weather interference usually fragments, but this held steady. Dan leaned over. "Real quiet. You seeing that?" I nodded. Then the return disappeared completely, not off the edge, but blinking out mid-grid like someone flipped a switch. No trail, no climb, nothing. I pulled up the raw radar playback, hoping for a system glitch explanation. No luck. The raw return matched exactly. Appearance at high altitude, brief hold, then instant drop to sea level before vanishing. A system diagnostic showed everything normal. No errors, no drop pings. Against protocol, I printed the hard copy logs. Something felt off. Dan stayed silent, returning to his screen. Around 2 a.m., 2 unidentified men arrived. No uniforms, no recognizable vehicle. They entered through the side entrance with badge access. Claiming to be contract IT support from Seattle, one went directly to the radar terminal while the other requested system logs from Dan. When I asked who called them, Dan simply said, "Not us." They remained until just after 5 a.m. Upon leaving, the system had been completely rebooted. Hard drives were purged. Every radar sweep from 1 to 4 a.m. was overwritten. My printed logs? Gone. Dan and I exchanged a look. He cut off my attempt to speak. "Don't," he said. We finished the shift normally, logged a quiet night, no incidents. A week later, the manager called me in for a standard review. Asked if I remembered anything strange. I replied, no, just a quiet night. They smiled. Thought so. We were road tripping from Phoenix to Reno, just because. Hit some ghost towns, planned to hike Zion, maybe gamble for a night. Rachel was just another stopover, a tiny blip on the map we'd barely registered. The Moonlight Motor Inn sat like an old trailer from the 70s, 6 rooms facing a cracked lot surrounded by endless desert. A dusty diner across the road looked frozen in 1982. We rolled in around 6:30, just before sunset. The front desk guy, older white beard, name tag reading Randy, handed us an actual key on a blue plastic tag. When I mentioned we were heading to Reno, he nodded like we'd announced some impossible journey. "You kids staying just one night? That's smart," he said, then paused and looked out the window. "Don't go wandering after dark," he added. I chuckled, assuming he meant coyotes or snakes. Megan didn't even hear him, already walking toward our room. Inside was surprisingly clean. Stained carpet, but fresh sheets. A small table, bulky TV, humming mini fridge. We dropped our backpacks and walked to the diner as the desert sky turned a brilliant orange. Basic burgers, fries, watery coffee. 2 truckers played cards in the back. Patty Klein looped on the jukebox. The waitress smiled that weird smile, eyes not matching, like she'd heard every story 1,000 times. Back at the motel around 8:15, we cracked beers and sat on the curb. The night cooled quickly but remained warm. Stars emerged impossibly clear. I'm not usually one for scenery, but out here the sky was something else. Dan transferred to Phoenix months later. I left the FAA the following year. I've never seen anything like that night again. Nothing even close. But I think about it more than I probably should. The night sky was a canvas of darkness, sprinkled with the Milky Way like scattered salt. Silence surrounded us, broken only by occasional wind gusts. Megan knew her constellations, pointing them out while I tracked satellites drifting overhead. Around 9 p.m., something caught her eye. Low on the southern horizon, a bright white light hung motionless. I initially dismissed it as an aircraft from the nearby Groom Lake base, but something felt off. It remained perfectly still, defying the movement of other objects in the sky. Megan suggested it might be a star, but its position and lack of twinkling contradicted that theory. Suddenly, the light began rising, not like a typical aircraft, but straight up with an unnatural, controlled speed. We both stood, watching intently. Then came the moment that still haunts me. In an instant, the single white dot split into 2 lights, positioned side by side. No dramatic transition, just a sudden separation. They hovered briefly before vanishing completely, not fading, not flying away, just disappearing as if a switch had been flipped. No sound, no trace, nothing. We waited, hoping for some explanation, but the sky returned, to its previous state of starry stillness. When we looked at each other, no words were necessary. Something extraordinary had just occurred. Back in the motel room, an unsettling quiet descended. I locked the door, something I never do, and turned on the TV, seeking comfort. Only static greeted us, the screen flickering before turning an eerie blue. The silence was deafening. We hiked into Lassen National Forest near Cinder Cone, taking an unmarked trail. Kale Hollow wanted to escape. No cell service, no traffic, just quiet. We packed light. 1 tent, 2 sleeping bags, basic gear, a Jetboil trail mix, canned soup. Kayla carried her big old camera, the strap fraying at the edges. She photographed everything, trees, trail, sky, me struggling to light a fire. I used to tease her about it. She'd say she liked documenting the small moments. That first night, we camped by a shallow creek, about 4 miles in. The TV signal at our motel room had been strange before this trip. I remembered how it dropped out, and we'd left the TV on just for some light. Around 1 a.m., Megan woke me up, standing by the window. "Something's out there," she whispered. I looked out. Dark desert, faint hill outlines. The security light flickered, which wasn't new. Then I saw it, not in the sky but on the ground, maybe 100 yards into the scrub. A weird, round glow like a stationary flashlight, about softball sized. No spreading light, just perfectly circular. "It's moving," Megan said, and it was, drifting silently just above the ground, gliding left to right in a straight line. Then it stopped, hovering. I pulled the curtain closed. We didn't sleep. We sat in the blue TV light, quiet. Eventually the signal returned and a news anchor's voice filled the room, but I wasn't listening. By morning, everything looked normal. Pale blue sky. The diner served fresh coffee. 2 truckers still played cards like they hadn't moved. We checked out around 8. Randy was gone. A woman in her 40s at the desk smiled politely, as if we'd never met. Pulling out of the lot, I glanced back. Nothing in the sky, nothing in the hills. But the TV signal stayed strong the rest of our trip, and the stars never looked that clear again. We were alone, with no one else around. The campsite felt peaceful after dinner, as we sat by the fire, laughing about how strange it was to not constantly check our phones. She joked about deleting Instagram when we returned, though we both knew she'd never actually do it. She loved posting too much. Around 3 a.m., something woke me up. The tent fabric seemed to move as if something had brushed against it, but the trees were completely still. When I unzipped the flap to investigate, nothing was there. No animals, just the quiet sound of the creek. Kayla was zipped into her sleeping bag, facing away from me. Morning brought an odd conversation. She asked if I'd gotten up during the night, mentioning she thought she'd heard whispering, but assumed it was a dream. I hadn't heard anything like that. Our hike that day was unusually quiet. Normally, Kayla would chatter constantly about random facts, her job, or tell stories. This time, she just walked ahead, silently taking pictures. Dark clouds built up quickly in the late afternoon, bringing unexpected rain that soaked us before we could set up the tent. We found shelter under some thick pines and made a hasty, damp camp. Kayla's camera fogged up, and she muttered that something felt off about our location. That night, a strange experience consumed me. A bright white light hovered outside the tent, unmoving and unlike any flashlight. I was paralyzed, unable to move or call out. Something felt inches away, just behind the tent fabric. The air became impossibly heavy, then darkness. When I woke, morning sunlight filled the tent. Kayla was gone. Her camera remained, which was unusual. She never went anywhere without it. Her boots were missing, so I initially thought she'd gone for a quick walk. Hours passed. I circled the campsite, calling her name, growing increasingly desperate. By noon, I was shouting. I climbed a rock ridge, spinning in circles and scanning the forest. No sign of her, no footprints in the soft dirt. Panic overtook me. Around 2 p.m., I left everything behind, taking only my phoneless signal. I drove until I had a bar of service and called 911. Search and rescue was dispatched by nightfall. They made me wait with a deputy at a ranger station while the first group went up. They found our campsite the next morning. My tent, our food, her sleeping bag, but no sign of her. Then things got weird. They asked me to send them any photos I had of her. I said she'd taken most of them on her Canon, but I had a few on my phone from earlier hikes, past trips, plus the one I took of her by the creek that first night. I opened my gallery to show them. It wasn't there. I thought maybe I'd accidentally deleted it. So I checked the trash folder. Nothing. Then I scrolled through every photo I had from the last year. There wasn't a single picture of Kayla. Not from the campsite. Not from the road trip down from Eugene. Not from anything. It made no sense. I had photos from the grocery runway the day before we left. I had a blurry selfie I remembered taking of both of us at the gas station. But now it was just me in the frame. I told the deputy it had to be a glitch. Maybe my phone corrupted something, or the cloud backup failed. He nodded, but didn't say much. They asked for her full name. I said Kayla Darnell. Spelled it out, gave her birthday, where she worked, everything I knew. They ran it and came back saying there was no record of anyone by that name in Oregon. I thought maybe they had the spelling wrong. So I pulled up my texts to show them messages from her. There were none. Not a single message from her number. I scrolled through months of conversations. Nothing. I checked my contacts. Her number wasn't saved. My call log had no history of us talking, even though we'd confirmed the trip just 3 days before. I gave them the number anyway. They dialed it, disconnected. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my laptop and pulled up my social media. Kayla wasn't in any of it. No tags, no comments, no likes. We'd been friends for almost 3 years. We met at a film festival in Bend. She'd introduced me to half the people in my network. She'd posted pictures of us hiking dozens of times. Now there was nothing, not even her profile. I checked mutual friends. No one seemed to know who I was talking about. I called people, old coworkers, a guy she dated, marked a waypoint on my GPS app, and started hiking back out fast. It was dusk when I reached the trailhead. Last winter vanished along with Kayla's memory. At the coffee spot, I asked about her. Dark blonde hair, denim jacket with patches. The barista didn't recognize her name. Same story at the art supply store where she used to work weekends. Back home, her tent still stood with 2 sleeping bags. The blue one had her name tagged inside in Sharpie. K. Darnell, clear as day. Strange how memories persist when everything else fades. She called ferns forest squid once, and now that's all I think about when I see them. She lives in my head while the world pretends she never existed. My work took me to a remote botany field lab in central Utah. Just me, a generator, and endless sandstone and sagebrush stretching to the horizon. The station nestled in a narrow gulch south of the San Rafael swell, pressed against a small bluff. Designed for one person, with tiny living quarters and an attached greenhouse. My days were quiet, cataloging genetically variant buckwheat strains, monitoring soil chemistry. That week, the landscape held its wreath. No breeze, no clouds, air thick and stale, insects scarce. Heat lingered differently even after dark. Everything changed Tuesday morning. My 6 custom soil sensors, rigged with an Arduino array I'd built, usually sent data to my laptop every 10 minutes. But that morning revealed a 5-hour blank spot between midnight and 5 a.m. The system flatlined, then resumed as if nothing happened. I checked everything. Wi-Fi was fine, generator ran smoothly. The timestamps didn't make sense. Later, in the greenhouse, I found an LED grow light with a warped, half-melted plastic casing. It looked like someone had taken a blowtorch to its edge. Impossible, given its distance from any heat source. The greenhouse sensors had been acting up, and I'd chalked it up to electrical quirks. The night sensor alarm blared at 2 a.m. with 3 sharp beeps, signaling a dangerous pH drop below 4.0, something completely abnormal for this soil. Boots on and flashlight in hand, I stepped outside. The air carried an odd scent, not quite smoke, but like burned dust and scorched minerals. The kind of smell you'd expect near a lightning strike on rocky ground. When I opened the greenhouse door, humidity rushed out, which made no sense. I hadn't watered anything, and it hadn't rained in days. The glass was completely fogged over. Inside, something was profoundly wrong. Every single plant had turned. Not fallen or dragged, but precisely rotated, all facing inward toward a bare meter-wide patch of soil I'd kept open for new specimens. The ground looked undisturbed yet strangely compressed, a smooth, even circle as if something had been resting there. No prints, no marks. Above this spot, the glass ceiling bore a faint black scorch mark, spreading outward in a ring about a foot across. Spiderweb-like cracks radiated from the center, and the metal framing seemed subtly warped with a strange heat distortion. I backed out and locked the door. The next morning, I checked the time-lapse camera. The footage ran normally until 12:47 a.m., when it suddenly glitched. One frame showed static, then black, then white. Something was definitely not right. The timestamp jumped forward 4 hours. When I reviewed the raw image files, I discovered a troubling pattern. Every file between 12:47 and 4:51 was corrupted and unreadable, nothing more than digital noise. Running a recovery program revealed 437 images marked as missing or partial. Clicking through the thumbnails, most were just garbage data fragments. A few caught my eye, brief flashes of color like violet and pale green, as if the lens had captured a sudden burst of light. One image showed a blurry curve of something smooth and metallic in the top right corner, but without any identifying features. I deleted the corrupted files and switched off the camera. That's when the plants started behaving oddly. Gallium leaves curled inward, as if trying to close around something invisible. 2 wild barley pots bent their stems at sharp 90-degree angles toward a central bare spot, maintaining that position even after I rotated the pots. When I moved a fern back to the bench's edge, I found it tipped over and facing the center again the next morning. Thursday night, I decided to keep watch. I sat in the greenhouse with a flashlight, unsure what I might witness. Around 1:30, something strange happened. The temperature plummeted rapidly, from 77 to 61 degrees in under 5 minutes, confined only to the greenhouse. The air felt electrified. My arm hair stood on end. LED lights flickered and then shut off completely. An eerie silence followed. Total stillness. No generator hum, no wind, not even distant insect sounds. I'm uncertain how long this lasted, maybe 2 minutes, perhaps 10. When I switched my flashlight back on, the central bare spot looked darker, as if wet, though no rain had fallen. The plants were sly, teally tilted again. The next morning revealed more oddities. All 6 soil sensors were burnt out, plastic casings bubbled, wires melted into the dirt. Strangely, my laptop remained untouched, and nothing else in the greenhouse showed damage. I radioed in, citing a hardware malfunction as my reason for cutting the trip short. They didn't probe further. Before leaving, I collected a small soil sample from the central patch, sealing it in a jar that now sits on a shelf in my apartment. Over the following days, the sample dried out completely. The glass has changed over time, its deep red now fading to a muted gray. A thin, almost imperceptible ring traces the inner edge, where the soil seems to have been nudged away from the center, leaving behind a ghostly residue. Occasionally, when I pass by, a fleeting scent catches me, that familiar burned dust smell that vanishes almost as quickly as it appears. I apologize, but no text was provided for me to rewrite. Could you please share the original text you would like me to restructure?